Hey guys, welcome to Science Owl Station. Today we are going to step quietly across thresholds that haven't felt a human footfall in thousands of years. We are going to peel back the layers of earth, vines, and sand to uncover the sleeping giants of our history, cities that were once the center of the world, only to vanish into the mist of time, waiting for us to find them again. Imagine a bustling metropolis, filled with the sounds of merchants shouting, wheels clattering over cobblestones, and the smell of baking bread warding off the morning chill. Now, imagine that same place, but silent. The stone walls are still there, but the voices are gone. The roofs have bowed under the weight of centuries, and the streets are carpeted not with footsteps, but with wildflowers and dust. This is the journey we are taking tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you are in the world right now, and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how we are all connected across different time zones, sharing this same quiet moment. Wherever you are, let the world slow down for a while, soften your gaze, let the hum of life around you fade, and gently drift with us into tonight's quiet exploration. There is a profound and gentle melancholy in the idea of a lost city. It sounds like something from an adventure novel, doesn't it? A map with burned edges, a compass spinning wildly, and a hidden temple of gold. But in the eyes of science and archaeology, a lost city is something far more intimate and far more human. It is a paused moment, a deep breath taken by civilization that was never exhaled. These places are time capsules, sealed not by intention, but by circumstance. When we speak of cities that have been buried for thousands of years, we aren't just talking about ruins. We are talking about a great sleep. Have you ever wondered how an entire city just disappears? It seems impossible in our modern world, where every inch of the globe is mapped by satellites and every street corner is logged in a digital database. But the Earth is a restless storyteller, and it loves to cover its tracks. Archaeologists often talk about the concept of stratigraphy, the layering of time. Think of the ground beneath your feet like the pages of a very thick, very old book. The surface, where we walk today, is just the dust jacket. Beneath us, separated by layers of soil, silt, and debris, lie the previous chapters. In the Middle East, they have a specific word for this, a tell. To the untrained eye, a tell looks like a natural hill, a gentle rise in the flat landscape. But it isn't a hill at all. It is a layer cake of civilizations. One city built upon the ruins of another, rising higher and higher over millennia until the final inhabitants left, and the wind smoothed the edges into a soft, grassy mound. Inside that mound, the city sleeps. The silence of these places is heavy, but it isn't empty. It's a texture. When you stand in the ruins of a place that hasn't been inhabited for 3,000 years, the silence feels different than the quiet of an empty room in your house. It feels patient. It feels like the air itself is holding a memory. Scientific analysis of soil samples from these sites reveals fascinating details about this sleep. We find microscopic pollen grains trapped in the dirt that tell us exactly what flowers bloomed in the gardens on the day the city fell silent. We find the chemical signature of wood ash, telling us about the hearth fires that once burned. We can even analyze the wear patterns on the stone thresholds of doorways to see how many generations of sandals shuffled across them. The city may be lost to history books, but the molecular memory of the place remains vivid and awake. But why do they sleep? That is the question that pulls at the edges of our curiosity. We tend to think of destruction as a loud, violent event, a catastrophe. And sometimes it is. We will talk about the fire and the fury later. But more often than not, the burial of a city is a slow, gentle process. It is a whisper, not a scream. Consider the wind. It seems harmless enough, rustling the leaves outside your window right now. But give the wind 1,000 years, and it becomes the greatest architect of concealment. In desert regions, a city that is abandoned is slowly, grain by grain, tucked in by the sand. It starts in the corners of the courtyards. Then it drifts against the walls. Eventually, the dunes rise to meet the rooftops, and finally, the city is gone, preserved perfectly in a dry, dark embrace, safe from the sun and the rain. It's almost a kindness, this burial. It protects the murals on the walls and the pots on the shelves from eroding away. Or consider the jungle. In the tropical regions of our planet, the forest is always waiting to reclaim its territory. We have found vast urban networks using LiDAR technology, which we'll explore deeper later on, where the burial wasn't dirt, but biology. Vines as thick as a human torso wind their way through windows, and massive tree roots flow over stone walls like slow-moving spilled wax. The city doesn't sink underground, it is simply absorbed. It becomes part of the breathing, living forest. The stones turn green with moss, the timber rots away to feed the soil, and the jaguars make their dens in the palaces of kings. There is a strange comfort in knowing that nothing is truly gone. We used to believe that once a civilization collapsed, it was erased. But modern science has shown us that the Earth is a fantastic preserver. It acts like a vast, dark museum storage room. We are walking on top of history. Beneath the asphalt of modern parking lots or the wheat fields of quiet farms, there are often walls, wells, and roads sleeping in the dark. One of the most poignant aspects of these sleeping cities is the everyday nature of what we find. When we dig, we don't just find golden statues. We find toys. Small, clay animals made for children. We find dice carved from bone. We find graffiti scratched into walls, complaints about the weather, jokes, or declarations of love like "Marcus loves Claudia," preserved for 2,000 years. These little details bridge the gap of time. They remind us that the people who lived in these lost places were exactly like us. They worried about their jobs, they loved their families, they needed a good night's sleep. And then, for one reason or another, the rhythm of their lives stopped, and the city began its long slumber. As we drift through this series, we aren't just going to look at the stones. We are going to look at the moments frozen in time. We are going to try to understand the atmosphere of these places. We want to know what the light looked like when it hit the white limestone of a temple that no longer exists. We want to know what the air smelled like in a spice market that is now deep under the ocean. We often use the term lost city, but perhaps misplaced is better. Or waiting. Because as long as we have curiosity, as long as we have the tools to look beneath the surface, nothing remains lost forever. The Earth holds these secrets close, but it is willing to share them if we ask gently enough. Tonight, we are the explorers. But we don't need pith helmets or shovels. We just need our imaginations. We are going to travel to places that are off the maps. We are going to visit cities that were drowned by the sea, choked by the jungle, or hidden by the desert. We are going to walk their silent streets and listen to the stories they have been waiting to tell. The night is long, and the history is deep. So, let's begin our descent into the past. Let's find out what happens when a city closes its eyes. When we stand before a silent ruin, gazing at the jagged teeth of broken walls against the sky, our minds naturally drift toward the dramatic. We imagine the crash of catapults, the roar of invading armies, or the earth shaking violently enough to topple empires. And it is true, violence has played its part in the history of silence. But more often than not, the reason a city falls asleep is far more subtle, and strangely, far more human. The lullaby that sends a civilization into its centuries-long slumber isn't always a scream. Sometimes, it is simply the wind changing direction, or the rain deciding not to fall. Let's consider the most famous, and perhaps the most paradoxical, cause of this preservation, the volcano. We tend to think of volcanic eruptions as pure annihilation. And in the immediate moment, they are terrifyingly destructive. But from the perspective of history, a volcanic eruption is a master archivist. It is a violent act that results in a gentle, eternal embrace. When a volcano like Vesuvius exhales, it doesn't just destroy, it seals. The ash that falls is like a heavy, grey snow. It is soft, it is ubiquitous, and it is chemically inert. This is the ash lullaby. Unlike a fire that consumes wood and leaves nothing but carbon, or a flood that washes away artifacts and rots organic matter, volcanic ash packs everything in tight. It creates an anaerobic environment, a space without oxygen. Without oxygen, the bacteria that usually break down wood, leather, and fabric cannot survive. The decay process is halted instantly. It is as if the city is dipped in amber. The clock stops. The loaf of bread left in the oven doesn't mold, it carbonizes, keeping its shape for 2,000 years. The ash settles into the folds of a curtain, the weave of a basket, and the expression on a statue's face, preserving the very volume of the air that occupied that space. It is a tragic miracle. The city dies, yes, but it is also saved from the ravages of time itself. It doesn't age. It simply waits in the dark, perfectly still, until we come to brush the grey snow away. But not all cities are frozen by sudden heat. Some are lulled to sleep by the slow, creeping dryness of a changing climate. This is a much quieter ending, a slow fade rather than a sudden cut to black. Civilization is, at its core, a conversation with water. We settle where the water flows. But the Earth's climate is a living, breathing cycle, and sometimes, the water moves away. Imagine a city built on the edge of a lush river valley. For generations, the rains are predictable. The crops grow tall, and the granaries are full. But then, slowly, imperceptibly, the rains begin to shift. It doesn't happen in a single year. It happens over decades. The wet season becomes a week shorter, then a month. The river level drops by an inch, then a foot. This is the thirsty sleep. We see this written in the tree rings, a science called dendrochronology. Ancient beams of wood found in these ruins show us narrow, cramped rings, indicating year after year of struggle and drought. When the water fails, the city doesn't explode. It evaporates. The population slowly thins out. Families pack up their wagons and move toward the horizon, looking for greener lands. The city shrinks. The outer neighborhoods are abandoned first, their mud bricks crumbling back into the dust. Eventually, only the stubborn remain. And finally, when the wells draw up nothing but sand, the last person walks out the gate. The city is left intact, but empty. The wind takes over residence in the palaces, whistling through the dry corridors. It is a melancholy, peaceful death, born of a thirst that could not be quenched. Then, there is the sleep induced by the shifting currents of human connection, the changing trade routes. Cities are like living organisms, they need a blood supply to function, and for a city, that blood is commerce. Think of the great caravans of the Silk Road, winding their way across deserts and mountains. Cities bloomed along these routes like flowers springing up beside a river. They existed to feed, house, and trade with the travelers. But history is fickle. A new ship design allows merchants to bypass the dangerous land route and sail across the ocean instead. A mountain pass collapses or becomes too dangerous due to bandits. The blood flow redirects. This is the economic slumber. It's a ghost town phenomenon on a grand scale. The markets that once smelled of spices and echoed with a dozen languages begin to grow quiet. The inns have no guests. The gold stops flowing. There is no war, no plague, no disaster. Just a realization that the world has moved on. The city is like an old station on a railway line that has been decommissioned. It sits there, perfectly functional, beautiful even, but no longer needed. The desert sands or the forest vines slowly creep in to reclaim the space, not with malice, but with the inevitability of nature filling a vacuum. And sometimes, the cause of sleep is an invisible spectre, disease. The microscopic world has toppled more civilizations than any army. A plague sweeps through, and the survivors, terrified and heartbroken, flee the city, viewing it as cursed. They leave their possessions behind, wanting nothing to do with the tainted place. The city is left to the birds and the foxes, a quarantined memory that nature eventually swallows. There are even stranger reasons: intentional abandonment. We have found cities where the doors were seemingly locked, and the people just left. Perhaps it was a religious prophecy, a belief that the gods had forsaken the ground. Or perhaps a social collapse where the people simply decided that the complex hierarchy of urban life was no longer worth the effort, and they dispersed back into smaller, simpler village lives. This is the walk away. It leaves us with the most questions. We find tools on workbenches and pots by the hearth, suggesting that the departure wasn't a panic, but a decision. A collective sigh, and a turning of backs. Regardless of the cause, whether it was the hot blanket of ash, the dry gasp of drought, the silence of poverty, or the invisible hand of sickness, the result is the same. The human noise stops. The maintenance stops. The roofs, unlatched, begin to leak. The seeds blown by the wind find purchase in the cracks of the pavement. The roots pry apart the stones. The city enters the cocoon phase. It is important to understand these causes because they set the stage for what we find today. A city buried by a volcano offers us a snapshot, a precise second in time. A city abandoned by drought offers us a skeleton, the durable structures of stone and earth that survived the slow decline. A city lost to the jungle offers us a puzzle, a sprawling map hidden under a canopy of green. We are about to visit these places. We are about to walk into the ash, into the sand, and into the forest. We are going to see what happens when the pause button is pressed on a civilization, and no one ever comes back to press play. Our first stop is perhaps the most iconic sleeper of them all. A place where the sleep came so fast, the residents didn't even have time to finish their lunch. And so, we arrive at the shadow of the mountain. We are standing in the Campanian region of Italy, near the curve of the Bay of Naples. The year is 79 AD. It is a world of bright sun, olive groves, and the shimmering blue of the Mediterranean. And dominating the horizon is a mountain that the locals simply thought of as a part of the landscape, a gentle, vine-covered giant that had been silent for so long, they had forgotten it had a voice. They didn't even have a word for volcano in their language. To them, Vesuvius was just a mountain. But Vesuvius was not asleep, it was merely holding its breath. Pompeii is the most famous sleeping city in the world, and for good reason. It is the gold standard of archaeological time travel. But the true marvel of Pompeii isn't just that it was destroyed, it's how it was saved. It is a paradox of preservation through annihilation. When we walk the streets of Pompeii today, we are not walking through a ruin that slowly crumbled over centuries of neglect. We are walking through a city that was snatched directly out of a Tuesday afternoon. The science of what happened here is terrifyingly precise. It wasn't a river of slow-moving lava that buried the city, as many old movies might suggest. Lava is hot and heavy, it crushes and burns everything it touches. If it had been lava, Pompeii would be a flat plain of black rock today. Instead, it was something much lighter, and in a way, much more insidious, pyroclastic fallout. Imagine a column of ash and pumice shooting 20 miles into the stratosphere, a grey pillar holding up the sky. As this column collapsed, it sent waves of superheated gas and debris rushing down the mountain at 100 miles an hour. But then came the snow. Not white, cold snow, but grey, hot ash. It fell for hours, then days. It was light enough to drift into every open window, every crack in the door, every fold of clothing. It filled the city like water filling a cup. It rose past the first floors, past the second floors, until only the tops of the highest roofs poked out like islands in a grey sea. And then, it hardened. Over the centuries, the volcanic material turned into a type of stone called tuff. Inside this stone cocoon, the city was hermetically sealed. The oxygen was choked off completely. And this is where the chemistry of preservation takes over. Without oxygen and moisture, the bacterial decay that usually erases history couldn't happen. The clock stopped. When excavators finally began to peel back the layers in the 18th century, they weren't digging up skeletons in the dirt. They were opening a vacuum seal. The level of detail is almost disorienting. You can walk into a bakery, a pastrinum, and see the oven. It looks like a pizza oven you might see today, a domed brick structure. But look closer. Inside that oven, archaeologists found 81 loaves of bread. They were round, divided into 8 wedges, and stamped with the baker's mark to prevent theft or ensure quality. They had been put in the oven to bake on that fateful morning, and they are still there. Carbonized, yes. Black as coal, yes. But they are bread. You can see the texture of the crust. You can see the break in the dough where the heat caused it to rise. It is a ghost of a meal that was never eaten. In the Corpani, the fast food joints of the Roman world, we find counters with holes cut into them for large jars called dolia. These jars held dried nuts, lentils, and wine. We found a ladle still resting in the bottom of a jar, as if the server had just turned around to greet a customer and never turned back. We found eggs, intact, their shells fragile but whole. We found fish bones from a lunch that was halfway finished. It is this mundane intimacy that makes the silence of Pompeii so loud. It wasn't a city of statues and heroes, it was a city of people who were just about to have lunch. But the most haunting discovery of Pompeii, the thing that truly separates it from any other ruin on Earth, is the people themselves. And this brings us to a moment of ingenious scientific improvisation. In the 1860s, an archaeologist named Giuseppe Firelli noticed something strange. As his team dug through the hardened ash, they would occasionally hit a hollow space, a cavity in the rock. Inside these cavities, they found human bones. Firelli realized that the ash had packed tight around the victims' bodies at the moment of death. Over time, the soft tissue of the bodies had decomposed, leaving behind a perfect, empty mold in the shape of the person. Instead of breaking through these voids, Firelli poured liquid plaster into them. He let it set, and then he chipped away the surrounding ash. What emerged was not a skeleton, but a statue of the final moment. These casts are heartbreakingly detailed. You can see the folds of their tunics. You can see the straps of their sandals. In some of the finer casts, you can even see the expression on their faces, the furrowed brows, the mouths covered by cloth to filter the dust. We see couples embracing. We see a man raising his hands to shield his face. There is one cast that always stays with me. It is not of a human, but of a dog. He was found in the house of Orpheus. He was chained to a post, unable to run. The plaster cast captures him twisted on his back, legs reaching up, his mouth open in a silent yelp. You can see the studded collar around his neck. It is a stark reminder that the city's sleep fell upon everyone, from the wealthiest merchant to the loyal guard dog. That dog has been waiting there, frozen in his struggle, for nearly 2,000 years. It's a vivid, sharp image of life interrupted. Yet, amidst this tragedy, there is color. The darkness of the burial protected the city's art from the bleaching power of the sun. The frescoes of Pompeii are startlingly bright. When we shine a light on them today, the Pompeian red, a rich, cinnabar pigment, glows as if it were painted yesterday. We see gardens painted on the walls of windowless rooms to create the illusion of the outdoors. We see birds, fountains, and mythical creatures. In the house of the Vetii, the walls are a gallery of mythology, exploding with golds and teals. It's strange to stand there and realize that the volcano, the very thing that killed the artist, is the only reason we can admire their work today. If Pompeii had survived, these walls would have been painted over, or crumbled, or renovated 100 times. Instead, they are pristine. Walking through Pompeii feels like trespassing. The doors are open. The mosaic floors, depicting guard dogs with the warning cave canem, beware of the dog, are still tiled into the entryways. The ruts in the road from the chariot wheels are deep and distinct. You can put your own foot in the groove and feel the rhythm of the traffic that flowed here. It is a city of echoes. The silence is not the silence of emptiness, it is the silence of a held breath. Every object, every wall, every cast is a testament to the suddenness of the end. 1 minute, the city was loud, vibrant, and alive. The next, it was grey. And then, for 17 centuries, it was nothing but a legend under the grass. Pompeii teaches us that history is not just a list of dates and battles. It is the smell of baking bread, the color of a painted wall, and the loyalty of a dog on a chain. It is the small, fragile details of life that usually fade away, here caught and held in the stone, sleeping perfectly until we were ready to find them. But Pompeii was buried by ash, a dry, suffocating blanket. Just a few miles away, its sister city met a very different fate. If Pompeii was frozen in air, Herculaneum was sealed in stone. If Pompeii is the city frozen in grey snow, Herculaneum is the city sealed in black amber. While the two cities shared the same tragic date, August 24th, 79 AD, and the same destroyer, their experiences of the Great Sleep were fundamentally different. Pompeii was suffocated. Herculaneum was drowned. Pompeii was a bustling commercial hub, a place of trade and traffic. Herculaneum, located a few miles to the northwest, was smaller, wealthier, and quieter. It was a seaside resort, a place where Roman senators built their vacation villas to escape the heat and noise of Rome. It was a town of marble floors, expansive gardens, and libraries. And because of its location, the wind spared it at first. When Vesuvius blew its top, the wind carried the ash cloud south toward Pompeii. For hours, while Pompeii was being buried in pumice, Herculaneum sat in an eerie, terrifying twilight, watching the mountain burn, but relatively free of debris. But that reprieve was a trap. When the column of ash finally collapsed, it didn't drift down like snow. It came down like a landslide. A pyroclastic surge, a turbulent, superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and rock roared down the mountainside at hurricane speeds. It hit Herculaneum with a force that Pompeii was spared. But strangely, this violence created a preservation more delicate and complete than arguably anywhere else on Earth. The material that swallowed Herculaneum wasn't just dry ash, it was a mixture of hot ash and gas that behaved like a fluid. It flowed like a river of concrete. It surged through the streets, broke down the upper floors of buildings, and filled every room from floor to ceiling. It didn't just cover the furniture, it encased it. It seeped into the tiniest cracks. And then, as it cooled, it solidified into a rock-hard tuff, deep and dense. Herculaneum today lies buried under nearly 60 feet of this material, 3 times deeper than Pompeii. Because this burial was so deep and so airtight, it stopped time in a way that even Pompeii couldn't. At Pompeii, wood burned away or rotted, leaving voids. But at Herculaneum, the searing heat of the surge carbonized the wood instantly, turning it into charcoal, and the mud sealed it before oxygen could turn it to ash. The result is hauntingly domestic. In Pompeii, we look at the stone shells of houses. In Herculaneum, we look at the furniture. We find wooden doors still hanging on their original hinges, sliding back and forth on their tracks. We find wooden shutters still guarding the windows. In one house, archaeologists found a wooden cradle rocking gently in the silence of the stone. In another, a fabric press still holds the clothes that were being smoothed out for wearing. We found beds. Not the stone platforms of Pompeii, but actual wooden bed frames with the slats still intact. We found 3-legged side tables where someone might have set a cup of wine. We even found food that goes beyond the crusts of bread. In the source of Herculaneum, which offered a treasure trove of dietary data for scientists, we found evidence of a rich, varied diet: figs, fish, dormice, a Roman delicacy, and expensive spices imported from the East. The preservation is so absolute that we can tell the difference between the wood of a fig tree and the wood of a pine tree used in construction. But the greatest treasure of Herculaneum's deep sleep is not its furniture, but its words. On the outskirts of the town lies a massive estate known as the Villa of the Papyri. It is named after a discovery that looked, at first glance, like a pile of burnt logs. When excavators in the 18th century first found these blackened, cylindrical lumps, they thought they were charcoal briquettes. Some were even thrown away or used as fuel. But then, someone noticed the faint, spiraling layers. They weren't logs. They were scrolls. This villa contained the only library from the ancient world to survive to the present day. Nearly 2,000 scrolls were found, carbonized by the heat. For centuries, they were a source of immense frustration. They were brittle as burnt toast. If you tried to unroll them, they crumbled into black dust, taking their secrets with them. They were books that refused to be opened. But science, like the archaeologists, is patient. In recent years, we have begun to read these sleeping books without ever touching them. Using a technique called virtual unrolling, a high-tech combination of X-ray phase contrast tomography and AI, scientists can now see inside the scrolls. The X-rays detect the microscopic difference in density between the carbonized papyrus and the carbon-based ink. It is like reading a closed book by looking through the cover. Slowly, letter by letter, the library is waking up. We are finding works of Epicurean philosophy, poetry, and history, texts that were thought to be lost forever. It is a staggering thought. The heat that should have destroyed these books is the only reason they still exist. If the volcano hadn't erupted, these papyrus rolls would have rotted away in the damp Italian air 1500 years ago. The disaster saved the library. For a long time, Herculaneum held another mystery. Where were the people? In the early excavations, very few bodies were found in the houses, leading experts to believe that almost everyone had evacuated during those few hours of grace before the surge. It was a hopeful story. But in the 1980s, the excavation reached the ancient shoreline. Today, Herculaneum is inland, but in 79 AD, the waves lapped against the city walls. Down by the beach, there were a series of stone boathouses, arched chambers where fishermen would store their nets and skiffs. When archaeologists opened these chambers, the hope vanished. They found hundreds of skeletons, packed tight together. Men, women, children, clutching jewelry, coins, and lamps. They had crowded into the boathouses, waiting for rescue by sea that never came. The surge had caught them there. It is a somber, silent crowd, huddled together in the dark for 2 millennia. Yet, among them, we found a soldier. He was lying face down in the sand, his sword still at his belt, his tool belt loaded with a hammer and chisels. He wasn't huddled. He seemed to be working, perhaps trying to launch a boat or organize the evacuation until the very last second. He is a frozen monument to duty. Comparing the two, Pompeii feels like a city interrupted, while Herculaneum feels like a city suspended. The depth of the burial makes Herculaneum feel more remote, more underworld. The tunnels dug by early explorers to loot the theater are still there, dark rabbit holes winding through the solid rock. When you descend into the excavation site today, you are going down deep into the earth, walking in a canyon with the modern city of Ercolano perched high on the cliff above you. You are literally walking in the past, looking up at the bottom of the present. The silence here is heavier. the stone is harder. And the secrets are still emerging. Because Herculaneum is so difficult to dig, the rock is as hard as concrete. Huge portions of the city are still buried, sleeping safely under the modern streets. Who knows what other libraries, what other villas, what other wooden cradles are waiting down there in the dark? We leave the shadow of the volcano now, traveling east and forward in time. We are trading the grey ash of Italy for the red sandstone of the Jordanian desert. We are going to a place that wasn't buried by a sudden explosion, but was hidden by the landscape itself, a city carved so seamlessly into the earth that you can walk right past it and never know it's there. We leave the coast now, turning our backs on the blue Mediterranean and the grey ghost of the volcano. We are traveling east, crossing the sea and landing in the arid, sun-baked expanse of the Jordanian desert. The air here is different. It lacks the salt of the ocean. Instead, it smells of sagebrush, dry earth, and the faint, sweet scent of heated stone. We are heading toward a place that wasn't lost because it was buried, but because it was hidden. A city that decided to play a game of hide and seek with the world, and won for 1,000 years. This is Petra. To find it, you have to walk the path the ancients walked. It begins with the Seek. Imagine a crack in the earth, a massive geological fault line where the mountain was rent in two by tectonic forces millions of years ago. This is the only way in. It is a narrow gorge, winding for nearly a mile through the rock. The walls tower hundreds of feet above you, blocking out the harsh desert sun and creating a permanent, cool twilight. Walking through the Seek is an exercise in sensory deprivation and anticipation. The world outside, the noise, the heat, the horizon, disappears. All you see is the twisting ribbon of the canyon floor and the ribbon of blue sky far above. The walls are not grey, but a swirling palette of reds, oranges, and pinks, polished smooth by the flash floods of millennia. It is a natural corridor of silence. The only sound is your own footsteps echoing off the stone, sounding like a heartbeat in the chest of the mountain. And then, just as the gorge feels like it will go on forever, it opens up. But it doesn't just end, it frames a miracle. Through the narrow slit at the end of the Seek, you see it. A column, a capital, a pediment, the treasury or Al-Khazneh. It is one of the most famous sites on earth, but the science of its construction is what truly stops the breath. When you look at a normal building, like the Parthenon in Greece or a cathedral in Europe, you are looking at construction. Block by block, stone by stone, lifted, placed, and mortared. You are looking at addition. But when you look at the treasury, you are looking at subtraction. The Nabateans, the mysterious nomadic Arabs who built this city over 2,000 years ago, didn't build up. They carved in. This is negative architecture. The treasury isn't a building standing in front of a cliff, it is the cliff. It is a sculpture on the scale of a cathedral. Think about the audacity of that engineering challenge. If you are building a wall with bricks and you make a mistake, you put a brick in the wrong place, you just take it down and try again. But here, there is no undo button. If a mason struck the rock too hard and cracked the nose of a statue or the flute of a column, that mistake was permanent. It was written in stone forever. To achieve this, they had to reverse the entire construction process. They didn't start at the bottom and build scaffolding to go up. They started at the very top of the cliff face. They carved out a ledge to stand on, and then they began to hammer away at the rock, shaping the roof and the upper friezes. As they finished a level, They carved the rock away beneath their feet, lowering themselves down the facade. They literally consumed the scaffolding as they worked. The floor they stood on became the rubble they carted away. It required a level of planning and visualization that rivals any modern CAD software. They had to see the finished palace inside the rough mountain before they even picked up a chisel. And the stone itself is a protagonist in this story. This is sandstone, a sedimentary rock formed by layers of sand deposited over millions of years. This geology gives Petra its nickname, the Rose City. As the sun moves across the sky, the color of the stone shifts. At dawn, it is the color of pale apricot. At noon, it is a blinding white gold. And at sunset, it burns with a deep, rich crimson, as if the rock itself is glowing from within. But a beautiful facade does not make a city. A city needs life, and in the desert, life means one thing: water. This is where the true genius of the Nabateans lies. They weren't just sculptors, they were master hydraulic engineers. Petra is located in a basin where the annual rainfall is only about 6 inches. By all logic, a metropolis of 20,000 people should not exist here. But the Nabateans understood the rhythm of the desert. They knew that when the rain did come, it came in violent, sudden flash floods. Instead of fearing these floods, they harvested them. If you look closely at the walls of the Seek as you walk through, you will see a channel carved into the rock at waist height. It is lined with ceramic pipes. These pipes were part of a massive, invisible network that wrapped around the mountains like veins. They built dams to stop the flash floods from destroying the city, diverting the raging water into vast, underground cisterns carved into the bedrock. They lined these cisterns with waterproof cement, storing millions of gallons of water to last through the dry months. They essentially turned the entire landscape into a sponge. Every drop that fell on the mountains was caught, guided, and stored. They had fountains in the middle of the desert. They had swimming pools. A traveler arriving from the burning sands would have walked into Petra and heard the impossible sound of splashing water. It was a display of power. In a place where water was life, the Nabateans had enough of it to waste on decoration. Petra was a hub, a vital intersection on the ancient trade routes. The smell of the city would have been overwhelming: frankincense from Yemen, spices from India, silk from China. It was the Wall Street of the desert, where caravans stopped to pay taxes, rest, and trade news. But like all things, the desert is patient. The trade routes shifted. The Romans took over, and then the Byzantines. And then, in the year 363 AD, the earth shook. A massive earthquake brought down many of the freestanding buildings, the ones built with blocks, not carved from the mountain. The columns toppled. The intricate water system cracked. Slowly, the people left. The city didn't die in a blaze of glory, it just faded. The Bedouin tribes moved into the cool, carved tombs, using the royal chambers as living rooms, their cooking fires blackening the ceilings where kings once slept. The location of the city was forgotten by the Western world. It became a rumor. A legend of a city of stone hidden in the mountains. For centuries, the only visitors were the wind and the lizards. The sand blew in, softening the sharp edges of the carvings. The dams filled with silt. The Rose City went back to sleep, guarded by the Bedouins who kept its secret fiercely. When you walk through Petra today, especially if you are lucky enough to be there at night, the feeling is otherworldly. The local Bedouins line the path to the treasury with thousands of paper lanterns. The candles flicker on the red sand. You sit in the dark, looking up at that massive, carved facade, illuminated only by the soft glow of the firelight. It feels like the city is holding its breath. The stone faces of the statues are eroded, faceless now, worn smooth by the blowing sand. They look like ghosts melting back into the mountain. It reminds us that even stone is not eternal. The wind is sandpaper. Every grain of sand that hits the cliff takes a microscopic piece of the city with it. Petra is slowly, very slowly, returning to the geology from which it was born. But for now, it stands. A testament to a people who looked at a mountain and saw a palace, who looked at a desert and saw a garden. We leave the dry heat of the canyon now. We are going to travel west again, across the Atlantic, to a place where the air is thin and the clouds are close enough to touch. We are going to a city that, like Petra, was hidden from the world, but not in a hole. This city was hidden in the sky. We are leaving the dry, red heat of the desert canyon now. We are ascending. The air is becoming thinner, cooler, and sweeter. We are traveling to the southern hemisphere, deep into the heart of the Peruvian Andes. We are going to a place where the earth meets the sky, a city that floats among the wisps of white mist like a ship stranded on a mountaintop. This is Machu Picchu. If Petra was the city hidden in the rock, Machu Picchu is the city built of the rock, seemingly grown straight out of the granite spine of the mountain. To get here, in your mind's eye, you must imagine climbing. Up from the roar of the Urubamba River, through the tangle of the cloud forest, until the trees suddenly break, and you are standing on a saddle of land between two jagged peaks. For nearly 400 years, the outside world believed this place was a myth. The Spanish conquistadors, who swept through South America toppling empires and melting down gold, never set foot here. They never even knew it existed. And that was not an accident. That was a strategy. When the Inca Empire began to collapse under the pressure of the invasion, the residents of this royal estate made a choice. They didn't fight, they didn't fortify. They simply left. But before they did, they burned the trails. They destroyed the bridges. They let the jungle swallow the paths that led up the mountain. They tucked their city in for a long, secret sleep, hiding it behind a curtain of green vines and heavy clouds. It is one of the greatest disappearing acts in human history. While the rest of the Inca world was dismantled, Machu Picchu sat here, pristine and silent, visited only by the condors and the morning mist. The silence here is different from the desert. It is a wet, soft silence. The air is heavy with moisture. You are so high up, nearly 8,000 feet, that you are often literally walking inside the clouds. The Quechua people call this the eyebrow of the jungle. It is a transitional zone where the Amazon basin reaches up to kiss the Andes. The science of Machu Picchu is a marvel of civil engineering, but most of it is invisible. Archaeologists often say that the city you see, the temples, the houses, the plazas, is just the tip of the iceberg. Nearly 60% of the construction effort went into what lies beneath the grass. The Inca were master terraformers. They knew that building a city on a narrow ridge between two fault lines, in a region prone to torrential rains and landslides, was an act of defiance against geology. So, they built the mountain before they built the city. They constructed massive terraces that stepped down the mountainside like a giant green staircase. These weren't just for farming corn and potatoes, they were structural buttresses. They stabilized the slopes, preventing the soil from sliding off into the river below. Underneath the visible grass of these terraces lies a sophisticated drainage system. The Inca laid the ground, topsoil on top, then sand, then gravel, then larger rocks. This acted like a giant filter. When the heavy tropical rains fell, the water didn't pool and turn the ground to mud, it filtered down quickly and safely, directed away from the buildings. Without this hidden engineering, the entire city would have slid off the mountain centuries ago. It is a city that is rooted to the earth. But the most hypnotic aspect of Machu Picchu is the stone itself. The architecture here is so precise it feels almost biological, as if the stones grew together. This is called ashlar masonry. The Inca did not use mortar. There is no cement holding these walls together. Instead, they cut the granite rocks with such mind-boggling precision that they fit together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The fit is so tight that you cannot slide a credit card or a knife blade between the stones. And remember, these aren't square bricks. They are irregular, polygonal shapes. Some stones have 12 corners, locking into the surrounding stones in every direction. Why go to this trouble? Why not just use mud mortar? The answer lies in the ground beneath them. Peru is earthquake country. If you build a rigid wall with mortar, when the earth shakes, the wall cracks and collapses. The Inca knew this. They built their walls to be flexible. This is the concept of seismic architecture. When an earthquake hits Machu Picchu, the stones don't break. They dance. They rattle and bounce slightly in their places, dissipating the energy of the tremor, and then, when the shaking stops, gravity pulls them back into their perfect, puzzle piece positions. The lack of mortar is not a lack of technology, it is a superior technology. The city breathes with the earth. While modern concrete buildings in Cusco have crumbled during earthquakes, the Inca walls have stood firm for 500 years, riding out the waves of the planet's energy. There is a tactile quality to these stones. They are pillow-faced, slightly rounded and smoothed. They invite you to touch them. They look soft, despite being made of granite, one of the hardest rocks on Earth. It is said that the Inca workers used harder river stones to pound and grind the granite into shape, a process of patience that is hard for us to comprehend today. It was a meditation in stone. Walk with me to the highest point of the city. Here sits a carved rock known as the Intihuatana. The name translates to the hitching post of the sun. It is a sculpture of abstract geometry rising from the bedrock. The Inca believed that during the winter solstice, the sun was drifting too far away from the earth. To prevent it from disappearing, they symbolically tied the sun to this stone to keep it close. It is a beautiful thought, a civilization trying to tether a star to a mountain. The stone is aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions. It is a calendar, a clock, and an altar all in one. Even now, if you hold your hand above the stone, without touching it, people say you can feel a strange resonance, a cold magnetism. The city was not a bustling metropolis of commerce. It was a royal estate, a retreat for the Emperor Pachacuti. It was a place for rest, for worship, and for observing the stars. At its peak, perhaps only 750 people lived here. It was an exclusive, quiet sanctuary. The noise of the empire was far away. Here, there was only the sound of the wind, the low hum of prayers, and the soft footsteps of llamas. And then, the sleep came. It wasn't sudden like Pompeii. It was a slow emptying. Smallpox, carried by the Europeans, likely reached the Andes before the Europeans themselves did. The population dwindled. The empire fractured. The staff left the estate to return to their villages. The thatch roofs decayed and fell in. The rain washed the floors clean. And the jungle waited. The cloud forest is a relentless gardener. Slowly, the orchids bloomed in the plazas. The moss painted the grey stones green. The trees rooted in the courtyards. Within a few decades, the sharp lines of the city were softened. From the valley floor, it looked like just another green peak. When Hiram Bingham, the American explorer, arrived here in 1911, he wasn't discovering it in the true sense. The local farmers knew it was there. A local boy, Pablito, led him up the mountain. Bingham was looking for the lost city of the Incas, and when he parted the vines and saw the white granite gleaming in the sun, he knew he had found something profound. He wrote that it was like a dream. Today, even with the tourists, if you find a quiet corner and sit and watch the clouds roll through the valley, you can still feel that dream. The clouds separate the city from the world below. It feels like an island in the sky. The llamas still graze on the terraces, keeping the grass short, just as they did 5 centuries ago. Their soft humming and the rustle of the wind are the only sounds. At night, when the people leave and the gates are locked, the city belongs to the Milky Way, the Moyu, or Celestial River, as the Inca called it. The stone mirrors the stars. Machu Picchu reminds us that sometimes, the best way to survive is to stay very, very still. It slept through the conquest. It slept through the colonial era. It slept through the Industrial Revolution. And because it slept, it survived. But not all sleeping cities are on mountain peaks. Some are hiding in plain sight, swallowed not by clouds, but by something much denser, much more tangled, and much more aggressive. We are descending now, leaving the thin air of the Andes for the humid heat of Southeast Asia. We are going to a place where the trees are the kings, and the stones are their prisoners. We have descended from the clouds. The thin, crisp air of the Andes has been replaced by the warm, wet velvet of the tropics. We are in Cambodia now. The air here is thick, you can almost drink it. It smells of wet earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet, heavy perfume of jasmine. And it is loud. Not with the noise of cars or machines, but with the buzzing of a million invisible cicadas, a wall of sound that vibrates in your chest. We are standing at the gates of Angkor. When we think of Angkor, we usually think of the famous temple, Angkor Wat, the 5 lotus bud towers reflected in the moat. It is the largest religious monument in the world, a masterpiece of symmetry and stone. But what science has recently taught us, thanks to modern laser technology, is that the temple is just the crown jewel of something much, much bigger. Angkor wasn't just a temple complex. It was a sprawling, low-density megalopolis. It was the Los Angeles of the ancient world. At its peak in the 12th and 13th centuries, this city covered an area of nearly 400 square miles. It was home to roughly 1 million people. To put that in perspective, at the same time Angkor was bustling with 1 million souls, London was a muddy village of maybe 15,000 people. Angkor was the largest pre-industrial city on the planet. And then, the jungle swallowed it. But the jungle didn't just cover it, it engaged in a slow-motion wrestling match that is still happening today. This is the most visceral example of the Great Sleep we will ever see. It is a battle between biology and geology, between the tree and the stone. The heart of this story is water. Archaeologists call Angkor a hydraulic city. The Khmer Empire didn't just build temples, they reshaped the hydrology of the entire region. They built massive reservoirs called barraris, vast, rectangular lakes entirely made by hand. The West Barrari is 5 miles long and over a mile wide. It holds incredible amounts of water. These weren't just for drinking, they were a climate control system. They captured the monsoon rains to irrigate the rice paddies during the dry season, allowing the empire to produce 3 or 4 harvests a year. Rice was the fuel of the empire. But this complex engineering was also its Achilles heel. Recent studies of tree rings in the region have revealed a climate whip, decades of severe drought followed by years of catastrophic monsoons. The water network, clogged with silt and overwhelmed by the erratic weather, began to fail. The blood of the city stopped flowing. And as the people slowly drifted away, leaving the wooden houses to rot and the canals to fill with mud, the forest saw its chance. If you want to see what happens when nature takes back a city, you have to go to the Temple of Ta Prohm. Unlike the main temple of Angkor Wat, which has been manicured and maintained, Ta Prohm was left largely as the French explorers found it in the early 20th century. It was left to the trees. The trees here are the true rulers. The most famous among them are the silk cotton trees, Tetrameles nudiflora, and the strangler figures. These are not the polite trees of a city park. These are monsters. They are architectural parasites. A bird drops a seed into a crack in the stone roof of a temple. The seed germinates, high up in the air, feeding on the moss and the dust. It sends fine, hair-like roots trailing down the side of the building, seeking the soil. At first, they are harmless, just delicate strings. But once they hit the ground and tap into the water table, the transformation begins. The roots thicken. They swell. They fuse together. They become like the tentacles of a giant octopus, or flows of pale, molten wax. They wrap around the columns. They spill over the walls. They snake through the doorways. The pressure these roots exert is immense. It is slow, hydraulic pressure. A root can exert hundreds of pounds per square inch as it expands. It forces the sandstone blocks apart. You can see walls that are bulging outward, held in a precarious embrace by the very thing that is destroying them. This is the irony of Ta Prohm. The trees are destroying the temple, but they are also holding it up. In many places, if you removed the tree, the building would collapse. The roots have become the mortar. The living wood and the dead stone are locked in a structural codependency. Walking through here is a surreal experience. The light is filtered through the high canopy, dappled and green. You are walking through corridors where the roof has fallen in, forcing you to climb over piles of mossy rubble. And everywhere, the roots are flowing. There is a famous spot where a giant root, thick as a tree trunk itself, snakes down over a gallery wall, framing a doorway. It looks like the leg of a dinosaur stepping on a dollhouse. And peering out from behind these roots are the faces of the Apsaras, the celestial dancers carved into the walls. They smile their serene, frozen smiles while the wood slowly creeps across their faces. It creates a haunting contrast, the delicate, feminine beauty of the carvings versus the raw, muscular power of the trees. There is another temple nearby, the Bairn, which offers a different kind of haunting. Here, it's not the trees that watch you, but the stones. The Bairn is a forest of stone towers, and carved on each side of every tower is a massive face, the face of the king, or perhaps the Bodhisattva of compassion. There are over 200 of these faces, each one 6 or 7 feet tall. No matter where you stand, you are being watched. The eyes are half closed, heavy-lidded, deep in meditation. The lips are curved in a slight, enigmatic smile. As the sun moves across the sky, the shadows shift, and the expressions on the faces seem to change. One moment they look benevolent, the next, melancholy. When the city slept, these faces watched the jungle grow. They watched the tigers prowl through the courtyards. They watched the monkeys play on the terraces. For centuries, the only audience for these hundreds of smiling giants was the forest itself. The scale of the reclamation here makes you feel small. It reminds us that our dominance over the planet is a lease, not an ownership. We pave the earth, we stack our stones, we hold back the water. But the moment we stop maintaining, the moment we turn our backs, the green tide rushes in. The silence of Anchor is heavy with this knowledge. It's a humid, breathing silence. The moss muffles your footsteps. The smell of damp stone and rotting wood is everywhere. It feels like a place that is dreaming. The layout of the temples was designed to be a map of the cosmos, a mirror of the Hindu universe on Earth. The central tower represents Mount Meru, the home of the gods. The moat represents the cosmic ocean. So, in a way, the trees haven't just conquered a city, they have conquered a universe. As we leave the dappled shade of the banyan trees, we are going to travel back in time, far deeper into the past than the medieval glory of Anchor. We are going to a place that challenges our very definition of what a city is. We are going to Turkey, to a settlement that is so old, it existed before metal, before pottery, and before streets were even invented. We are leaving the humid, root-choked temples of Cambodia and taking a massive leap backward in time. We are going back 9,000 years. Before Rome, before the pyramids, before metal tools, before writing. We are landing on the sun-drenched plains of Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey. Here, rising out of the flat agricultural landscape, are 2 large mounds of earth. To the locals, they are just hills in the distance. They call this place Catalhoyuk, which translates roughly to forked mound. But inside these mounds lies one of the most confusing and fascinating experiments in human history. This is the city without streets. Imagine arriving here in 7000 BC. You walk across the grassy plain, approaching the settlement. You see walls made of mud brick, plastered smooth. But as you get closer, you realize something is missing. There are no gates. There are no doors at ground level. There are no windows looking out at you. In fact, there are no alleyways or roads between the houses. The buildings are packed together tightly, wall against wall, like the cells of a honeycomb. The entire city is a single, solid block of mud and timber. To enter this city, you have to climb. You lean a ladder against the outer wall and pull yourself up. And suddenly, you are on the street. The life of Catalhoyuk happened on the rooftops. This is where the people walked. This is where the children played, skipping over the gaps between roofs. This is where the neighbors chatted while grinding grain or drying chickpeas in the sun. The road was a shifting landscape of flat mud roofs, baking in the heat or glistening in the rain. It was a communal highway in the sky. This design is brilliant in its weirdness. By jamming the houses together, they created a fortress without building a fortress wall. No wild animal or enemy raider could just walk into town. To get in, you had to know the way up. It also meant structural stability. Each house supported its neighbor, leaning on each other for centuries. And in the freezing Anatolian winters, the shared walls conserved heat, insulating the community like a huddle of penguins. So, how do you get home? You find your specific rooftop, you walk to a small opening, a square hole that served as both a chimney and a door, and you climb down a wooden ladder into the dark. Descending into a home in Catalhoyuk was an act of intimacy. You were climbing down through the smoke of the hearth. The ladder was the spine of the house. It was polished smooth by thousands of hands. Once your eyes adjusted to the dim light, you would find yourself in a space that was obsessively, startlingly clean. We often think of cavemen or Stone Age people as dirty, living in squalor. But Catalhoyuk shatters that stereotype. The interiors of these mud brick homes were plastered with a white, clay-based lime. And they didn't just plaster them once. They replastered them constantly, sometimes twice a month. Archaeologists have found walls with hundreds of layers of plaster, creating a surface as smooth and white as a modern sheet of paper. They kept these floors spotless. There is almost no microscopic trash found inside the homes. No bone chips, no ash spills. They were meticulous housekeepers. They even placed mats of woven reeds on the floors, creating distinct zones for working, cooking, and sleeping. And speaking of sleeping, the bedroom arrangements here bring a whole new meaning to the phrase, close to family. Inside the main room, there were raised platforms, plastered and covered in furs or mats. This is where the family slept. But directly beneath these sleeping platforms, curled up in the fetal position in the cool earth, were the ancestors. The people of Catalhoyuk buried their dead right under their beds. It sounds macabre to us, a scene from a horror movie. But to them, it was likely an act of profound comfort. They didn't send their loved ones away to a lonely cemetery outside of town. They kept them close. They slept literally inches above their grandparents and great-grandparents. It suggests a belief system where the line between the waking world and the sleeping world, between the living and the dead, was very thin. The dead were still part of the household. They were still home. The walls of these homes were not just white, they were canvases. This was a culture obsessed with the wild. We find paintings of leopards with spotted coats. We find scenes of hunting parties teasing giant boars. But the most dominant symbol is the bull. The aurochs, the massive, wild ancestor of modern cattle, was the king of their imagination. In many homes, they mounted the actual horns of these giant bulls into the walls and benches. Imagine sitting on a bench with the curving, sharp horns of a wild beast protruding from the clay next to you. It brings the raw, dangerous energy of the outside world right into the domestic safety of the living room. Living in Catalhoyuk meant you were never, ever alone. With houses sharing walls, you would hear everything. You would hear the neighbor's baby crying, the grinding of the obsidian stones, the murmur of conversations through the chimney holes. It was a life of total transparency. There was no private property in the way we understand it. There were no palaces for kings or chiefs. Every house is roughly the same size. Every burial has roughly the same goods. It was a society that seems, from the evidence, aggressively egalitarian. Everyone lived on the same level, literally and metaphorically. But even this tight-knit honeycomb couldn't last forever. After nearly 2,000 years of continuous occupation, a staggering run for any city, the experiment ended. We don't see signs of a massacre. We don't see a great fire that burned it all down. It seems the social glue just started to dissolve. Perhaps the population got too big. Maybe the resources nearby were exhausted. Or perhaps people just got tired of climbing ladders. Slowly, the residents climbed out of their roof holes for the last time. They walked across the neighbors' roofs, climbed down the outer wall, and walked away into the plain. The roofs eventually collapsed. The mud brick, unmaintained, melted back into the earth under the rain. The city turned into a hill. For 9,000 years, it was just a bump in the landscape where shepherds grazed their sheep, unaware that beneath the grass lay a city of art, obsession, and rooftop highways. It is a quiet reminder that the way we live now, with our front doors, our wide streets, and our fences, is just one way to be human. Once, a long time ago, we lived in a world without streets, where we entered our homes through the sky, and slept soundly on top of our history. We are moving now from the intimate, mud brick rooms of the Stone Age to the vast, structured grid of a much later, more modern, ancient world. We are heading east to the Indus Valley, to visit two cities that were so advanced, their plumbing systems wouldn't be matched again for thousands of years. We leave the huddled, honeycomb rooftops of Turkey and travel further east, crossing the rugged mountains of Afghanistan and descending into the vast, fertile plains of the Indus River Valley. We are stepping into modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. But in our timeline, we are landing in the Bronze Age, around 2500 BC. The world at this moment is a busy place. In Egypt, the pharaohs are stacking giant limestone blocks to build the pyramids of Giza. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians are carving cuneiform onto clay tablets. But here, on the banks of the Indus, something entirely different is happening. Something that feels eerily, impossibly familiar to our modern eyes. We are entering the twin cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. And the first thing you notice isn't a temple, or a palace, or a giant statue of a god. It is the streets. If you were to fly a drone over Mohenjo-Daro 4,000 years ago, looking down at the layout, you wouldn't see the chaotic, organic sprawl of a medieval city or the winding paths of a village. You would see a grid. A perfect, intentional, north-south, east-west grid. The streets are straight as an arrow. They cross at perfect 90-degree angles. The corners are rounded to allow carts to turn easily. It looks like Manhattan. It looks like a city that was planned on a drafting table before a single shovel hit the dirt. This is the city of order. The discipline here is staggering. Every house is built from baked bricks. And not just any bricks, standardized bricks. No matter where you go in this civilization, which covered a territory twice the size of ancient Egypt, the bricks are exactly the same size. They follow a perfect ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. 1 unit high, 2 units wide, 4 units long. This is the golden ratio of masonry. It is the most stable way to stack a wall. Imagine the level of coordination required for that. Millions of bricks, baked in thousands of kilns across hundreds of miles, all identical. It implies a society of inspectors, standards, and weights and measures that operated with clockwork efficiency. But the true marvel of Mohenjo-Daro is hidden under your feet. If you look down at the side of the street, you will see a brick-lined channel. It is covered with stone slabs that can be lifted for maintenance. This is a sewer system. In 18th century London or Paris, people were still throwing waste out of buckets into the mud of the streets. But here, in 2500 BC, the engineers of the Indus Valley had already solved the problem of urban sanitation. Almost every house had a private bathing area. The wastewater didn't run into the street, it ran through terracotta pipes in the walls, down into the covered street drains, and was carried far away from the city center to soak pits or the river. They even had manholes, access points where waste collectors could clear debris to prevent clogs. It is a sobering fact that the plumbing in Mohenjo-Daro was superior to that of many parts of the world until the 20th century. This was a civilization obsessed with water and cleanliness. The crown jewel of this obsession is a structure we call the Great Bath. It looks like a modern public swimming pool. It is a rectangular tank lined with finely fitted bricks. To make it waterproof, they coated the outside with a thick layer of natural bitumen, tar. It had stairs leading down into the water at both ends. We don't think this was for swimming laps. It was likely a ritual space, a place where the people came to purify themselves. Imagine the scene, the priests or citizens, dressed in cotton, which they were among the first to cultivate, descending the steps into the cool, clear water, surrounded by the high brick walls of the citadel, scrubbing away the dust of the plains. It is a monument not to a king, but to hygiene. And that brings us to the great mystery of the Indus Valley. Where are the kings? In Egypt, everything points to the pharaoh. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats scream of the power of the priests and rulers. But here, we have found no palaces. We have found no temples. We have found no giant statues of bearded conquerors holding swords. The largest buildings are not throne rooms, they are granaries. Huge warehouses designed to store wheat and barley. It appears to be a civilization run by merchants, or perhaps a council of elders, who cared more about trade and flood control than about ego. We have found toys, little terracotta carts with moving wheels, whistles shaped like birds, and monkeys that slide down a string. It paints a picture of a society that was prosperous, peaceful, and valued the happiness of its children. We have found almost no weapons of warfare. No caches of swords, no fortified walls designed to repel armies. The walls they did have seemed designed to repel floods. It feels like a utopia. A quiet, orderly, clean utopia where everyone followed the rules, the drains always worked, and the grain bins were always full. But this city has a voice we cannot hear. We have found thousands of small seals, little squares of steatite, carved with exquisite detail. They depict animals, elephants, rhinos, tigers, and a mysterious creature that looks like a unicorn. Above the animals is a line of script. Symbols that look like fish, jars, and stick figures. This is the Indus script. And to this day, it remains one of the greatest uncracked codes in archaeology. We have tried everything. We have used AI. We have used the best linguists in the world. But because the inscriptions are so short, usually just 5 or 6 symbols, we have no Rosetta Stone to help us translate. We don't know what they are saying. Are they names of merchants? Are they prayers? Are they contents of a jar? The silence of this script is heavy. It is a library where all the books are locked. We can walk their streets, we can hold their bricks, we can marvel at their plumbing, but we cannot hear their thoughts. We don't even know what they called themselves. Indus Valley is a name we gave them. Mohenjo-daro is a modern name meaning mound of the dead. Their true name is lost. And then, the water betrayed them. The Indus is a wild, shifting river. Over centuries, the tectonic plates shifted slightly. The path of the river moved away from the city. The Saraswati River, another vital artery, may have dried up completely due to climate change. The rains became erratic. The decline was slow. We see it in the bricks. In the later layers of the city, the golden ratio starts to slip. The bricks become uneven. Old broken bricks are reused to build new walls. The grand houses are subdivided into smaller, cramped apartments. The drains clog up and are not cleared. The order begins to fray. It wasn't an invasion that killed Mohenjo-daro. There is an old theory about an Aryan invasion and a massacre, but modern science has largely debunked this. The skeletons found there don't show signs of a battle, they show signs of malaria and anemia. The city simply ran out of energy. The trade routes collapsed. The river was too far away. And so, the people did what humans always do, they packed up and moved to smaller villages in the east. The wind filled the Great Bath with dust. The soars became homes for snakes. The orderly grid was softened by the drifting soil. For 4,000 years, the brick mounds stood there, confusing the locals, until British engineers in the 19th century started using the old bricks as ballast for a railway line, unknowingly destroying parts of a Bronze Age metropolis to build a train track. Today, when you walk through the ruins, the acoustic quality is startling. The brick walls reflect sound. You can hear your own footsteps echoing down the long, straight avenues. It is a ghost city of geometry. It reminds us that order, technology, and cleanliness are not guarantees of immortality. You can build the perfect city, but you cannot legislate the rain. We are leaving the dry plains now. We are going to leave the land entirely. We are going to a place where the concept of a lost city takes on a literal, suffocating meaning. We are heading to the coastlines, to the edge of the blue, to visit the cities that didn't just fall asleep, but held their breath and sank beneath the waves. We have walked through the ash of volcanoes, the sand of deserts, and the roots of jungles. But now, we must leave the solid earth behind entirely. We are going to the edge of the map, where the land ends and the vast, breathing blue begins. We are going to take a deep breath, hold it, and slip beneath the surface. There is perhaps no image that captures the human imagination quite like the sunken city. It taps into a primal fear and a deep wonder, the idea that the ocean, in all its power, can simply swallow a civilization whole. We have all heard the story of Atlantis. Plato wrote about it as a warning, a utopian society that grew arrogant and was punished by the gods, sinking into the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, Atlantis was treated as a fable, a ghost story to tell sailors. But science has a way of turning myths into maps. While we haven't found Plato's specific island, we have found something arguably more incredible. We have found the real Atlantises. Dozens of them. Cities that were once dry, loud, and alive, now resting in the silent, blue twilight of the continental shelves. The sleep of an underwater city is the deepest sleep of all. On land, ruins are subjected to the wind, the rain, and the scorching sun. But down here, the environment is constant. The temperature rarely changes. The light is dim and thick. And the silence is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of shrimp or the distant song of a whale. It is a museum kept in a state of suspended animation. Let's swim first to the coast of India, to the Arabian Sea. Here, off the shores of Gujarat, lies the city of Dwarka. For thousands of years, this city existed only in the verses of the Mahabharata, the great Indian epic. It was described as the glittering kingdom of Lord Krishna, a city of gold and crystal that was eventually reclaimed by the rising ocean. Historians treated it as a metaphor. But in the late 20th century, marine archaeologists began to see strange shadows on their sonar scans. They dove down, about 130 feet, and there, looming out of the murky green water, were walls. Massive stone fortifications. Immense stone anchors, some of the biggest ever found, suggesting a bustling port that welcomed giant ships from distant lands. Finding Dwarka was like finding Camelot. It was a moment where the line between once upon a time and carbon dating blurred. The science suggests that around 9,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically as the ice caps melted. The coastline retreated inland, and Dwarka, like many coastal settlements, was simply drowned. Now, colorful fish dart through the gaps in the ramparts where centuries once stood watching the horizon. We drift west now, to the warm, clear waters of the Mediterranean, to southern Greece. Here, just off the coast of Laconia, lies Pavlopetri. This is not a grand capital of kings, but it holds a title that commands respect. It is the oldest submerged city in the world. Pavlopetri is unique because of its accessibility. It is only about 10 to 13 feet underwater. You don't need a submarine or heavy diving gear to visit it. You just need a snorkel. Floating face down on the surface, looking through your mask, you can see the ghostly outline of a Bronze Age town spread out below you on the sandy floor. It dates back 5,000 years. You can clearly trace the grid of the streets. You can see the foundations of two-story houses, the courtyards, and the garden walls. You can see the stone-lined graves, cut directly into the bedrock under the floors of the homes, much like at Catalhoyuk. It is hauntingly domestic. You are hovering over a place where people made olive oil, wove textiles, and raised children 5 millennia ago. The preservation is so complete that you can see exactly how the town was organized. It wasn't destroyed, it was just submerged, likely by a series of earthquakes that shifted the land downward. Now, the streets are paved with sea grass, and the only traffic is the shoals of damselfish gliding over the thresholds. It feels like a dollhouse left at the bottom of a pool. But the true giant of the deep lies further south, at the mouth of the Nile River in Egypt. This is Thonis Heraclean. For centuries, this city was a ghost. It appeared in ancient texts as the primary port of entry to Egypt, the gateway where Greek ships unloaded their wares before traveling down the Nile to the pyramids. It was a place of immense wealth and religious power. And then, around the 8th century AD, it vanished. Not a stone was left on the shore. It wasn't until the year 2000 that a French archaeologist named Frank Godiot, scanning the wide expanse of Abuka Bay, found a magnetic anomaly. He sent divers down. what they found is hard to comprehend. The water here is not clear like in Greece, it is turbid, silty, and dark. Visibility is often just a few feet. Imagine diving into a thick fog. And then, suddenly, a face looms out of the darkness. A face of pink granite, larger than a car. They had found the lost temple of Amun-Jereb. But they didn't just find walls, they found the gods themselves. Colossal statues, some nearly 18 feet tall, were lying on the seabed, toppled but intact. The statue of Hapi, the god of the Nile floods, stands there looking up at the surface with an expression of eternal calm. He is the largest statue of a god ever found in Egypt, and he was hiding under just 30 feet of water for 1,000 years. The science behind Heraclean's disappearance is a terrifying phenomenon called soil liquefaction. The city was built on the soft clay and silt of the Nile Delta, a precarious foundation. When a massive earthquake hit, the solid ground instantly turned into a liquid soup. The heavy stone temples and statues simply sank straight down into the mud, like a stone dropped in batter. Then, a tsunami likely swept over the top, sealing the city's fate. The mud that swallowed the city also saved it. It protected the artifacts from the salt water and the worms. We found gold jewelry, delicate perfume bottles, and hundreds of shipwrecks, a naval graveyard frozen in time. We found huge stone steles covered in hieroglyphs, the edges as sharp as the day they were carved, proclaiming royal decrees that no one would read for 12 centuries. Watching the footage of divers uncovering these statues is mesmerizing. They use gentle suction hoses to vacuum away the sand. As the silt clears, a stone eye appears, then a nose, then a smile. It is an act of resurrection. We are waking the gods from their nap. There is a specific feeling to these underwater sites. It is a feeling of weightlessness, both physical and historical. On land, gravity pulls everything down, roofs collapse, walls crumble. But underwater, the water supports the structure. Things fall slowly. A pot dropped 3,000 years ago might still be sitting upright in the sand. And there is the light. As you descend, the warm colors, red, orange, yellow, are absorbed by the water. By the time you reach the ruins, everything is bathed in a monochrome of blue and green. It feels dreamlike, hazy. The edges of reality are soft. We are finding more of these cities every year as our technology improves. We are realizing that the coastlines of the ancient world were different from ours. The beach where a Neolithic family had a picnic is now miles offshore. The cave where they painted bison is now underwater. These cities remind us that the boundary between land and sea is not a fixed line. It is a negotiation. And sometimes, the sea wins. We surface now, breaking through the interface of water and air, gasping for a breath of the modern world. We are going to dry off and head back to the desert, but this time to a different kind of desert. We are going to the hidden corners of the Middle East, to find the cities that didn't sink, but were carved into the very bones of the earth by people who knew the secrets of stone. We have resurfaced from the depths of the ocean, shaking the salt water from our hair, and now we return to the dry, purifying heat of the desert. But we are not going back to Petra. While the Rose City gets all the fame, hidden deep in the sands of Saudi Arabia lies its silent, mysterious sister. A place that feels even more lost, even more asleep. We are traveling to Hegra, known today as Madain Saleh. If Petra is a city hidden in a canyon, Hegra is a city exposed to the infinite sky. The landscape here is surreal. It looks like the surface of Mars. The sand is a deep, rusty orange, soft as powder. And rising out of this flat ocean of sand are massive, solitary outcrops of sandstone, island mountains that look like melting wax or giant mushrooms. It is in these lonely rocks that the Nabateans carved their final resting places. Hegra was the southern capital of the Nabatean kingdom, the quiet outpost on the edge of the known world. And the silence here is absolute. Unlike Petra, which is often crowded with tourists and donkeys, Hegra stands in a profound, windswept isolation. For centuries, it was avoided. Local legends said the place was cursed, a ghost town to be bypassed. This superstition acted as a force field, protecting the tombs from looting and vandalism. When you approach one of the 111 monumental tombs here, the first thing that strikes you is the loneliness of the architecture. In Petra, the facades are often jammed together, fighting for space on the cliff walls. In Hegra, a single, massive boulder might host just one tomb. The most famous of these is Qaza al-Farid, the Lonely Castle. It stands entirely alone, a 4-story monolith carved from a single rock. It is breathtakingly beautiful, but if you look closely at the bottom, you see a secret. It is unfinished. The top is crisp, detailed, and polished. The bottom is rough, jagged rock. This frozen work in progress is a gift to science. It confirms exactly how the Nabateans worked, from the top down. It freezes the moment the chisel stopped, perhaps because the family ran out of money, or the empire fell. It is a sentence left mid-word. But the true voice of Hegra isn't in the stone, it's in the text. Petra is strangely silent when it comes to writing. We have almost no inscriptions there. But at Hegra, the facades are talking to us. Above the doorways of these tombs are carved panels of text, written in an early form of Arabic script. These aren't poems, they are legal contracts. They are warnings. This tomb belongs to so-and-so and his family. May Dushara the god curse anyone who sells this tomb, or rents it, or buries someone else here. They list fines. They name specific judges. These inscriptions wake the city up. Suddenly, we aren't just looking at pretty rocks, we are looking at a society with property laws, inheritance disputes, and a bureaucracy. We realize that the people sleeping inside these rocks were worried about the future. They wanted to secure their legacy. They were negotiating with eternity. The preservation in this arid climate is startling. We have found leather tunics, baskets, and even fruit seeds inside these tombs. The dry air acts as a natural museum curator. It desiccates organic matter before it can rot. But Hegra wasn't just a cemetery, it was a living city. Using geophysical surveys, ground-penetrating radar, scientists have peered beneath the sand in the flat areas between the rocks. They found a ghost map. They found the outlines of mud brick houses, markets, and city walls. They found that the dead city of stone was surrounded by a living city of earth that has simply melted away. The Nabateans here were masters of the desert. They didn't fight the environment, they hacked it. We have found the remains of 130 wells in Hegra. But they didn't just dig holes, they engineered tap systems. They used shaduffs, counterweighted levers, to lift water. They created lush gardens in the middle of this baking wasteland. Imagine the visual shock of it, the red sand, the golden rocks, and then, suddenly, the exploding green of pomegranate trees and date palms. It was a mirage that was real. Hegra also sits on the incense road. This was the highway of the ancient world. Frankincense and myrrh, commodities more expensive than gold, were carried on camelback from the southern tip of Arabia up to the Mediterranean. Hegra was the customs station. The tolls collected here built these magnificent tombs. But trade routes are fragile arteries. When the Romans decided to shift the trade to the Red Sea, using ships instead of camels to bypass the taxes, the blood supply of Hegra was cut off. The caravans stopped coming. The wells were allowed to fill with sand. The mud brick houses crumbled. The city went to sleep not with a bang, but with a slow, dry sigh. The Bedouins moved through, camping in the shadow of the tombs, their campfires blackening the ceilings, but they left the structures alone. Standing before these tombs at sunset is a spiritual experience. The setting sun sets the sandstone on fire. The rock glows with a violent, beautiful orange light, while the carved doorways remain in deep, cool shadow. You feel the weight of the silence. It is a clean, empty silence. There is a specific tomb, the tomb of Lihian son of Kuza, that captures this feeling perfectly. It is massive, over 70 feet tall. The door is dark and inviting, but there is no body inside. It was never used. It is a monument to a death that happened somewhere else, or a plan that never came to fruition. It is a waiting room for a guest who never arrived. Hegra teaches us that immortality is a lonely business. The people who built this wanted to be remembered forever. And in a way, they succeeded. But they are remembered in a landscape so empty, so vast, that their monuments feel like small, brave gestures against the overwhelming scale of the universe. We leave the red rocks of Arabia now. We are going to follow the ghost of that incense road north and east. We are going to merge onto the greatest superhighway in human history. We are going to the Silk Road. We are traveling to the lands where the desert isn't a rocky canyon, but an endless ocean of shifting dunes that swallows cities whole. We are now drifting onto the Silk Road, that legendary ribbon of commerce that stitched the East and West together for centuries. But the Silk Road wasn't a single paved highway, it was a shifting network of trails through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. And along this route, like beads on a broken necklace, lie cities that died when the thread was cut. We are entering the Taklamakan Desert in western China. The name itself is a warning. In the local Uyghur language, Taklamakan is often translated as the place of no return, or you go in, but you do not come out. It is a sea of death. Dunes here can rise nearly 1,000 feet high. The temperatures swing from roasting heat to freezing cold. And yet, deep inside this terrifying void, there are cities sleeping under the sand. One of the most haunting is the city of Naya. Naya is often called the Pompeii of the Silk Road, but that doesn't quite do it justice. Pompeii was destroyed, Naya was simply abandoned. It sits in the middle of nowhere, a ghost town of bleached timber sticking out of the dunes. 1,500 years ago, this was a lush oasis. It was a thriving commercial hub where traders from China, India, Persia, and Rome met to swap jade, silk, and spices. The city was fed by the Naya River, which flowed down from the Kunlun Mountains. But the river moved. Or perhaps the glacier shrank. The water stopped reaching the oasis. The evacuation of Naya seems to have been sudden and panicked. We have found dogs tied up outside houses, left to wait for masters who never returned. We have found unfinished weaving on looms. We have found granaries still full of millet, now desiccated and ancient. Because the climate is so incredibly dry, the preservation is miraculous. It is unparalleled. Archaeologists have found blue and white batik textiles that look like they were dyed yesterday. They have found a wooden guitar, a pipa, with its strings missing but its body intact. They have found documents written on wooden tablets in a script called Kharosthi, an ancient Indian language that died out centuries ago. These tablets are heartbreakingly mundane. They are letters. The tax collector is coming, hide the grain. Please send me the sheep you owe me. My dear wife. They are the text messages of the 3rd century, frozen in wood. Walking through Naya today, if you can get permission, as it is strictly protected, is like walking through a hallucination. You are trekking across scorching sand dunes, and suddenly, you see a row of dead poplar trees, standing upright, marking the line of an ancient avenue. You see the timber frames of houses, the wood grey and weathered but still standing, defying the wind for 15 centuries. It looks like a movie set for a post-apocalyptic western. But the Silk Road has other ghosts, further west. Let's travel across the steppes to the Syrian desert, to the bride of the desert, Palmyra. Palmyra is a tragedy of a different kind. It was a city of immense beauty, a cultural hybrid. It stood at the crossroads of the Roman and Persian empires, and its architecture is a perfect blend of both. It had the colonnades of Rome and the intricate patterns of the East. Under its famous queen, Zenobia, Palmyra briefly rebelled against Rome and carved out its own empire. But empires are jealous things. Rome returned, sacked the city, and the slow decline began. The ruins of Palmyra are grand and theatrical. The great colonnade stretches for nearly a mile, a spine of pale gold limestone. Before the recent conflicts in the region, which sadly damaged some structures, you could walk this street at dawn and feel the ghosts of the caravans. The sleep of Palmyra is a sleep of stone. The Temple of Bel, before it was damaged, was a massive sanctuary that had been converted from a pagan temple to a church, then to a mosque, before falling into ruin. It holds the memory of 3 religions in its walls. But the most poignant feature of Palmyra is the Valley of the Tombs. Outside the city walls, huge tower tombs rise like skyscrapers of the dead. These weren't underground pits, they were multi-story apartment blocks for coffins. Inside, they were decorated with limestone busts of the deceased. These busts are mesmerizing. They are known for their large, wide-open eyes. They stare straight at you. They are often depicted holding objects that define their lives: a merchant holding a purse, a woman holding a spindle, a priest holding a bowl. They look surprisingly modern. They look like us. What killed these Silk Road cities? It wasn't just war. It was the ocean. When the Portuguese and Spanish explorers mastered the sea routes to Asia in the 15th century, the Silk Road became obsolete. Why risk your life trekking across the place of no return or dealing with bandits when you could load a ship with 10 times the cargo and sail around Africa? The world economy shifted. The flow of money turned away from the desert and toward the coast. The oasis cities, which relied on the constant stream of travelers for their water management and maintenance, began to dry up. The canals clogged. The sand moved in. There is a profound lesson in the dust of the Taklamakan. We tend to think of globalization as a modern invention. But Naya and Palmyra were global cities. We found Chinese silk in Palmyra and Roman glass in Naya. They were connected to the entire world. And yet, when the trade winds shifted, they vanished. The desert is the ultimate eraser. It patiently waits for us to make a mistake or to look away. In Naya, the sand dunes are constantly moving, revealing a house one year and burying it the next. The city is playing a slow, geological game of peekaboo. It is a reminder that civilization is a fragile garden that must be watered constantly, or the wilderness will take it back. We leave the old world now. We are going to cross the greatest ocean of them all, the Pacific. We are traveling to the Americas, to the high plateau of central Mexico. We are going to a city that was a ruin before the Aztecs even arrived. A city of giants that holds a secret in its very name. We have crossed the ocean and landed in the cool, high-altitude air of the Valley of Mexico. We are about 30 miles northeast of modern-day Mexico City. Around us, the mountains form a protective bowl. And in the center of this bowl lies a city that terrified the Aztecs. When the Aztec people stumbled upon these ruins in the 13th century, the city had already been abandoned for hundreds of years. They saw pyramids so colossal they believed they must have been built by giants. They saw a central avenue so wide it seemed made for gods, not men. They didn't know the real name of the city, so they gave it a name in their own language, Nahuatl, Teotihuacan. It translates to the place where men become gods. Even today, Teotihuacan feels like a machine designed to humble you. The scale is oppressive. The main thoroughfare, the Avenue of the Dead, stretches for nearly 2 miles. It is not just a street, it is a canyon of architecture. Looming at the end of it is the Pyramid of the Moon, and flanking it is the titanic Pyramid of the Sun. The Pyramid of the Sun is the third largest pyramid in the world. But unlike the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is a sharp, geometric point, this is a squat, heavy mountain of red stone and earth. It feels rooted, as if the earth itself is pushing up toward the sky. But the biggest mystery of Teotihuacan is not how it was built, but who ran it. In almost every other ancient Mayan or Egyptian city, we find the egos of the rulers plastered everywhere. I am King so-and-so, I conquered this, I built that. We find royal tombs filled with gold. We find steles recounting their lineage. But in Teotihuacan, silence. We have found no royal tombs. We have found no statues of kings. We have found no inscriptions boasting of a ruler's power. In a city that housed at least 100,000 people, making it the 6th largest city in the world in 500 AD, the rulers are invisible. This has led archaeologists to a radical theory: Teotihuacan might have been a republic. Or perhaps a corporate state run by a council of elites. The art here doesn't show kings, it shows priests, anonymous and uniform. It shows abstract gods. It shows animals. It suggests a society where the system was more important than the individual. And the housing confirms this. Most ancient cities have a palace for the 1% and shacks for the 99%. But Teotihuacan invented the apartment complex. The city is organized into grid-like compounds. Each compound is a stone-walled block containing multiple apartments, shared patios, and temples. These weren't slums, they were high-quality housing. They had plaster floors, drainage systems, and murals on the walls. It appears that a huge portion of the population lived in relative comfort. It was a standardized, middle-class metropolis. But don't let the order fool you. This city had a dark, bloody heart. Recent excavations have taken us deep into the underworld of the pyramids. In 2003, a heavy rainstorm opened a sinkhole near the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Archaeologists lowered a robot into the hole and discovered a tunnel that had been sealed for 1,800 years. What they found inside was like a fever dream. The tunnel walls were coated with pyrite, fool's gold. When the priests walked down there with torches, the walls would have sparkled like a galaxy of stars. It was a simulation of the cosmos underground. At the end of the tunnel, they found offerings that chill the blood. They found jagged knives of obsidian. They found necklaces made of human teeth. They found the skeletons of large jagged fanged wolves and jaguars. And strangest of all, they found a miniature landscape with pools of liquid mercury. Liquid mercury is incredibly toxic and difficult to extract. To find lakes of it representing underworld rivers suggests a mastery of chemistry and a willingness to handle poison for the sake of ritual. It was a city obsessed with the cycles of time and the appeasement of fierce gods. The industry of this city was sharp. Teotihuacan controlled the obsidian trade. Obsidian is volcanic glass, sharper than surgical steel. If you controlled the obsidian, you controlled the weapons and the tools of Mesoamerica. We find Teotihuacan green obsidian all over the continent. It was their plastic, their steel, their currency. So why did it fall? Around 550 AD, the fire came. But it wasn't an invasion. The archaeological evidence shows that the burning was selective. The temples and the administrative buildings along the Avenue of the Dead were torched and smashed. But the apartment compounds, the homes of the people, they were largely untouched. This looks like an inside job. It looks like a revolution. Perhaps the middle class got tired of the ruling council. Perhaps the gap between the priests and the people grew too wide. Perhaps a drought caused a famine, and the people blamed the gods and those who spoke for them. They didn't burn their own homes, they burned the symbols of power. They decapitated the statues and smashed the masks. After the fire, the city slowly emptied out. The population dispersed. But the ghosts remained. When the Aztecs arrived centuries later, they were so awestruck that they incorporated the ruins into their own mythology. They believed the gods had gathered here at the beginning of time to sacrifice themselves to set the sun and moon in motion. They treated the city as holy ground. Walking the Avenue of the Dead today, you feel small. The architecture is designed to make you feel like an insect. The steps of the pyramids are steep and high, forcing you to bow your head as you climb. It is a city of silence, geometry, and hidden violence. It reminds us that even a society that provides housing for everyone, that masters science and trade, is not immune to internal collapse. A city is a social contract. And when that contract is broken, even the stones will burn. We are leaving the pyramids now. We are going to fast forward in time to the height of the Roman Empire. We are heading to North Africa, to the edge of the Sahara, to see a city that was built as a propaganda piece, a perfect copy of Rome dropped into the middle of the desert to show the barbarians what civilization looked like. We are leaving the high, volcanic plateau of Mexico and crossing the Atlantic once more, heading for the northern rim of the African continent. We are landing in Algeria, on the northern slopes of the Ors Mountains, just where the fertile land begins to give way to the vast, golden emptiness of the Sahara Desert. Here, stamped onto the landscape like a computer chip on a circuit board, lies the city of Timgad. If you were to look at Timgad from a satellite today, you wouldn't just see ruins. You would see a perfect square. Inside that square, you would see a perfect grid. It is arguably the most precise example of Roman urban planning ever discovered. It looks like it was drawn with a ruler and a protractor, because, in a way, it was. Timgad, or Thamagadi as the Romans called it, was not a city that grew organically over centuries like Rome or Athens. It didn't start as a village that slowly added a road here and a house there. Timgad was a pop-up city. It was built ex nihilo, out of nothing, around the year 100 AD by the Emperor Trajan. The science of Timgad is the science of geometry used as a weapon. The Romans understood something profound about conquest. You don't just conquer people with swords, you conquer them with lifestyle. Timgad was built as a retirement colony for the veterans of the 30th Legion Ulpia Victrix. These were men who had served their 25 years in the army and were being rewarded with land and a pension. But placing them here wasn't just a thank you. It was a strategic move. By dropping a city of retired soldiers right on the edge of the wild frontier, Rome was creating a permanent, loyal stronghold. But more importantly, they were creating a billboard. Timgad was a showroom for the Roman way. It was designed to dazzle the local Berber tribes. It shouted, "Look at our clean water. Look at our paved streets. Look at our baths. Don't you want to be like us?" Walking through the ruins today, the order is almost overwhelming. The city is bisected by two main streets, the Cardo, running north-south, and the Decumanus Maximus, running east-west. Where they cross, there is no confusion, no traffic jam. There is a perfect forum. The Decumanus is paved with blue limestone slabs, placed diagonally to minimize the jolting of chariot wheels, an ancient suspension system built into the road itself. Underneath these streets runs a sewer system as complex and efficient as the one in Rome. In the middle of the North African drylands, the Romans prioritized flushing toilets. And speaking of toilets, the public latrines of Timgad are a marvel of social engineering. We found a room with 25 stone seats arranged in a U shape, separated by armrests shaped like dolphins. There were no partitions. Going to the bathroom was a social activity, a place to gossip and discuss politics while water flowed continuously in channels beneath the seats to carry the waste away. It was cleaner and more sanitary than many European cities would be 1,700 years later. But the ultimate luxury in this arid landscape was the bathhouse. Timgad didn't just have one, it had 14. Imagine the psychological impact of that. In a land where water is precious, the Romans had enough of it to heat it up and sit in it. They piped water from springs miles away, storing it in massive cisterns. The citizens would move through the classic cycle: the tepidarium, warm room, the caldarium, hot steam room, and the frigidarium, cold plunge. The floors were suspended on brick pillars, the hypercaust system, allowing hot air from wood-fired furnaces to circulate underneath, heating the tiles so they were warm to the touch. This was underfloor heating in the 2nd century. Perhaps the most touching discovery in Timgad is the library. It is one of the only public libraries found in the Roman provinces. It contains semicircular niches that once held wooden shelves filled with scrolls. It suggests that this wasn't just a town of rough soldiers. It was a town of readers. It was a place where a retired centurion could sit in the shade of a colonnade and read Virgil while the desert wind blew outside the walls. The city captures a very specific, hedonistic philosophy. Archaeologists found an inscription scratched into the pavement of the forum that reads, Venari, Lavari, Ludir, Ridir, Ocist Viva. It translates to hunt, to bathe, to play, to laugh, that is to live. It is a simple, beautiful summary of the Roman dream. They weren't building for the afterlife like the Egyptians. They were building for now. They wanted a good life, a clean life, a life of pleasure. But Timgad was also a victim of its own perfection. As the Roman Empire crumbled and the Vandals swept through North Africa in the 5th century, the city began to suffer. The aqueducts were cut. The baths went cold. But the city didn't die immediately. It limped on under Byzantine rule and then the Arab conquest. Eventually, the desert reclaimed it. But unlike the wet soil of Europe that rots stones, or the jungle that rips them apart, the sand of the Sahara is a gentle blanket. It filled the streets. It covered the mosaic floors. It buried the Arch of Trajan up to its waist. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce stumbled upon Timgad in 1765, he couldn't believe his eyes. He described it as a small town full of elegant buildings. He didn't realize that most of the city was still under his feet. He was standing on top of the Pompeii of North Africa. Excavations by the French in the late 19th century peeled back the sand to reveal a city that looks like it was abandoned yesterday. The ruts from the chariot wheels are still deep in the limestone. You can still see the counters of the shops where they sold olive oil and garum, fish sauce. The silence of Timgad is the silence of geometry. Standing in the middle of that vast, empty grid, surrounded by the wild, chaotic mountains, you feel the immense arrogance and the immense capability of the Roman mind. They tried to impose a square on a round world. They tried to legislate nature. For a few centuries, it worked. The fountain splashed, and the people laughed. But in the end, the sand always wins. The grid remains, a skeleton of logic bleaching in the sun, a reminder that even the most organized empire is just a temporary arrangement of stones. We are leaving the rigid lines of the Roman grid now. We are traveling south, deep into the heart of West Africa. We are going to a place where the architecture isn't made of imported stone, but of the earth itself. We are going to a city that melts in the rain and has to be rebuilt by the hands of its people every single year. We are leaving the rigid, geometric ghost town of Timgad, where the Roman stone has defied the desert for 2,000 years. We are traveling south, crossing the vast, silent expanse of the Sahara, until the golden sand begins to darken, turning into the rich, fertile silt of the Niger River Delta in central Mali. We are arriving at a city that defies the very definition of permanence. In Rome, they built for eternity using marble and granite. Here, in the ancient city of Gen, they built with the earth itself. Gen is often called the city of mud, but that sounds dirty. It is, in fact, a masterpiece of sculpture. It looks like a giant, intricate sandcastle that has risen organically from the riverbank. There are no sharp angles here, no cold industrial lines. Everything is soft, rounded, and warm. The walls are the color of biscuits, baking in the African sun. The science of this architecture is a triumph of adaptation. We call it Sudano-Sahelian architecture, but it is really a conversation between the people and their environment. The primary building material is banko, a mixture of mud, rice husks, manure, and water. To a modern engineer used to steel and concrete, this sounds fragile. Mud melts in the rain, doesn't it? And it does. But the genius of Jen lies in its thermal properties. Mali is incredibly hot. The sun beats down with a ferocity that can crack pavement. But inside a banko house, it is cool. The thick mud walls act as a thermal mass. They absorb the heat during the day, trapping it like a battery, keeping the interior dark and comfortable. Then, at night, when the desert air turns cold, the walls slowly release that stored heat, warming the house. The building breathes. It regulates its own temperature without a single air conditioner or fan. It is a living skin. The crown jewel of this organic city is the Great Mosque of Jen. It is the largest mud brick building on the planet. When you see it for the first time, it takes your breath away. It rises up like a fortress of earth, with 3 massive towers topped with ostrich eggs, symbols of fertility and purity. Sticking out of the walls are hundreds of bundles of palm wood, called toran. They look like spikes on a cactus, or scaffolding that was left behind. And in a way, that is exactly what they are. They are permanent scaffolding. They are there because the city knows something that stone cities try to deny: nothing lasts forever. This brings us to the most beautiful and sleepy paradox of Jen. This city is constantly dying, and constantly being reborn. Every year, the rainy season comes to the Sahel. The torrential rains lash against the mud walls. The mosque begins to melt. The smooth surfaces erode, the sharp edges soften. The city starts to slide back into the mud from which it came. If the people did nothing, Jen would dissolve into a mound of dirt within a few decades, joining the lost tales of the Middle East. But the people do not let it sleep forever. Every spring, before the rains return, the entire city wakes up for the crepissage, the plastering. It is a festival of mud. The night before, the elders bless the mixture. Then, at the crack of dawn, a whistle blows, and thousands of residents, men, women, and children, race toward the mosque. It is a scene of joyous chaos. The men climb the toran, those wooden spikes, using them as ladders to reach the top of the towers. They look like acrobats clinging to the side of a cliff. The women carry buckets of fresh mud on their heads. The children play in the mixture. Within just a few hours, the entire mosque is resurfaced. It is given a fresh skin. This ritual has kept the city alive since the 13th century. It is a reminder that a city isn't just a collection of buildings, it is a relationship. The building protects the people from the sun, and the people protect the building from the rain. But there was a time when Jen didn't just survive, it thrived. In the Middle Ages, this was a cosmopolitan hub, a sister city to the legendary Timbuktu. It sat at the crossroads of the salt and gold trade. Caravans of camels would arrive from the north carrying slabs of salt, which was worth its weight in gold. Merchants from the south would arrive with gold dust and ivory. And with the trade came the scholars. Jen was a university town. Thousands of students flocked here to study the Quran, astronomy, mathematics, and law. We have found ancient manuscripts here, crumbling in leather satchels, that prove a level of scholarship that rivaled anything in Europe at the time. The sleep of Jen came slowly, with the arrival of the ships. When the Portuguese and other European powers began sailing down the coast of West Africa, the trade routes shifted. It was easier to move gold by sea than to drag it across the burning sands of the Sahara. The ports of the desert, like Jen and Timbuktu, began to fade. The libraries grew quiet. The scholars moved away. Today, Jen is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it is also a quiet, dusty town on the edge of the modern world. It feels like a place suspended in amber, or rather, suspended in mud. There are no cars in the old city, just narrow, winding alleyways designed to provide shade. The soundscape is ancient, the braying of donkeys, the call to prayer, the soft thud of pestles pounding millet. There is a profound lesson in the mud of Jen. We in the modern world are obsessed with maintenance-free materials. We want vinyl siding, stainless steel, things that we can build and forget. But Jen suggests that there is value in the maintenance. The act of repairing the city is what binds the community together. If the walls were made of stone, the people might not need each other as much. The city sleeps under the sun, baking hard and firm. But it is a light sleep. It knows that the rain is coming. It knows that it will soften and weaken. And it trusts that when the time comes, the hands of its children will be there to wake it up and make it whole again. It is a cycle of decay and renewal that feels much more honest than our desperate attempts to build things that never change. In Jen, the city is mortal, just like us. And that is what makes it beautiful. We are going to leave the soft, warm mud of Africa now. We are traveling back across the Atlantic to South America, but this time we are going high into the Altiplano of Bolivia. We are going to a place that bewilders engineers to this day. We are going to see stones that are not soft and organic, but hard, sharp, and cut with a precision that seems impossible for the time. We are going to the city of the giants. We are climbing even higher now. We are leaving the warm, river-fed mud of Mali and ascending to the roof of the world. We are traveling to the Altiplano of Bolivia, near the shimmering, deep blue expanse of Lake Titicaca. The air here is thin and cold. It burns the lungs and makes the heart beat a little faster. We are at nearly 13,000 feet above sea level. This is a landscape of stark, blinding beauty, brown earth, white snow-capped peaks, and a sky of such an intense, saturated violet blue that it looks like the edge of space. Here, in this breathless environment, lies the city of Tiwanaku and its mysterious, shattered neighbor, Puma Punku. If Machu Picchu is organic, appearing to grow naturally out of the living rock, Tiwanaku is different. It is industrial. It is mathematical. It feels almost alien. When the Incas conquered this region centuries later, they found these ruins already abandoned. They were so terrified and impressed by what they saw that they refused to believe humans had built them. They believed this was the Axis Mundi, the place where the god Viracocha created the world and the first race of giants. They looked at the size of the stones and the precision of the cuts, and they simply couldn't imagine that people with stone tools could have achieved it. And when you stand before the stones of Puma Punku today, you can forgive them for that thought. The masonry here is, scientifically speaking, baffling. The Inca used pillow-faced stones, granite rocks that were pounded into shape with harder river stones until they fit together. They are beautiful, but they look handmade. They have a soft, rounded quality. The stones at Puma Punku do not look handmade. They look machined. They are made of andesite and red sandstone, rocks that are incredibly hard and notoriously difficult to work with. Yet, the cuts on these stones are laser straight. The corners are perfect 90-degree angles. The surfaces are polished as smooth as a glass table. If you run your finger along the edge of a block, it is sharp enough to cut you. It defies the logic of the Bronze Age. How did a civilization without iron tools, without laser cutters, and without the wheel achieve this level of geometric perfection? The most famous puzzle pieces here are the H blocks. These are a series of identical stone blocks, shaped literally like the letter H. They are cut with such uniform precision that they look like they came off a factory assembly line. You could swap one H block for another, and it would fit perfectly. This implies a concept of prefabrication and standardization that we usually associate with the 20th century, not a pre-Inca culture from 1,500 years ago. The engineering gets even stranger. These blocks were designed to interlock. They have complex geometric grooves and dovetail joints carved into them. It's like looking at a giant, stone Lego set. They were meant to be assembled into a massive structure, possibly a temple or a palace, that would have been structurally sound against any earthquake. And to hold these massive stones together, the engineers of Tiwanaku did something revolutionary. They didn't just use gravity, and they didn't use mortar. They used metal. Archaeologists have found eye-shaped grooves cut into the tops of adjacent stones. For years, this was a mystery. Then, they realized the builders were pouring molten metal, a specific alloy of copper, arsenic, and nickel, directly into these grooves. The metal would harden instantly in the cold mountain air, creating a cramp that locked the stones together with an unbreakable grip. This required portable smelting technology that could reach incredibly high temperatures, right there on the construction site. Walking through Puma Punku today feels like walking through the aftermath of a catastrophe in a sci-fi movie. The giant slabs, some weighing over 100 tons, are scattered across the plain as if a giant hand had swept them off a table. Unlike other ruins that slowly decay, Puma Punku looks like it was smashed. But the silence here is not just about the stones, it's about the dirt. Tiwanaku was the capital of a powerful empire that lasted for nearly 5 centuries. At its peak, perhaps 40,000 people lived here. But this raises a biological question. How do you feed 40,000 people at 13,000 feet, where the frost kills crops and the soil is poor? The answer lies in the sukakolos, the raised fields. Recent satellite imagery and excavation have revealed that the Tiwanaku people were master hydrologists. They transformed the landscape. They dug massive canals and used the excavated earth to build raised planting beds. These canals didn't just provide water, they acted as a thermal battery. During the day, the intense solar radiation at this altitude heated the water in the canals. At night, when the freezing air descended from the mountains, the water released a blanket of warm steam that covered the crops, protecting them from the frost. It was a natural greenhouse system on a massive scale. This technology allowed them to grow potatoes and quinoa in quantities that defied the climate. It was the engine of their civilization. But engines can break. Around the year 1000 AD, the climate turned against them. A massive, prolonged drought struck the Andes. It lasted for decades. The water in the canals dried up. The thermal battery stopped working. The crops froze. The collapse of Tiwanaku was likely violent and terrifying. When the food ran out, the authority of the priests and the state crumbled. We find evidence of the defacement of statues. The famous Gate of the Sun, a monolithic arch carved with the image of the staff god, was found toppled and cracked. It seems the people turned on their gods when the hunger came. The city was abandoned, left to the wind and the llamas. The knowledge of how to cut the stones with such impossible precision was lost. The formula for the metal alloys was forgotten. The raised fields filled with silt and looked, for centuries, like natural ridges in the grass. Today, Tiwanaku is a place of deep, cold silence. The wind howls across the altiplano, whistling through the perfect geometric holes in the H-blocks. It feels like a place that is waiting for its builders to come back and finish the job. It challenges our arrogance. We look at these stones, 1,500 years later, and we have to admit, we still don't fully know how they did it. We are leaving the mysteries of the high Andes now. We are going to travel north, far north, to the edge of the Viking world. We are going to a windswept meadow in Canada to prove that history is often written wrong, and that a lost city can rewrite the timeline of an entire continent. We are leaving the high, thin air of the Andes and traveling north, far north. We are crossing the equator, crossing the tropics, and crossing the vast, grey expanse of the North Atlantic. We are heading to the edge of the world as it was known 1,000 years ago. We are landing on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. Here, on a windswept grassy terrace overlooking the ocean, lies a site that changed history books forever, Lance Auxiliary Meadows. For centuries, school children were taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. But the Earth held a different story, sleeping quietly under the peat and the grass of this remote Canadian shore. This is the story of the Vikings, and how they beat Columbus by nearly 500 years. The setting here is stark and beautiful. It is a place of cold winds, drifting fog, and rugged coastlines. The ocean is a steel grey, dotted with white icebergs drifting down from Greenland. It feels like the end of the line. And for the Norse explorers, it was. For a long time, the Viking presence in America was considered a myth. It existed only in the Vinland sagas, ancient oral histories written down in Iceland. These sagas told of a hero named Leif Erikson who sailed west and found a land of wild grapes, salmon, and self-sown wheat. Historians treated these stories like fairy tales, full of sea monsters and exaggerations. But in the 1960s, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist and Stein Ingstad, decided to follow the map of the stories. They sailed the coast of North America, asking locals if they knew of any strange ruins. In a tiny fishing village, a local named George Decker said, "Yes, there are some old Indian mounds over there." He led them to a grassy plain. What the Ingstads found wasn't Indian mounds. It was the ghostly outline of Norse longhouses. The science of Lance Auxiliary Meadows is the science of forensic archaeology. The site wasn't a towering ruin like Petra or a stone giant like Machu Picchu. It was made of sod. The Vikings built their houses by cutting rectangles of turf from the peat bogs and stacking them like bricks. Over 1,000 years, the roofs collapsed and the walls settled, turning the buildings into gentle, green ripples in the landscape. To the untrained eye, it looked like nature. But when the archaeologists cut into the turf, they found the distinct, multi-layered floor plans of Viking great halls. They found the blackened stones of hearths in the center of the rooms, exactly where a Norse chieftain would sit. But the smoking gun, the piece of physical evidence that proved this wasn't just a native settlement or a fisherman's shack, was a single, rusty nail. It seems insignificant. But you have to understand the technology of the time. The indigenous people of North America, the ancestors of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq, did not smelt iron. They worked with stone, bone, and wood. Iron was the signature technology of Europe. Finding an iron nail here was like finding a microchip in a medieval castle. It shouldn't have been there. And they didn't just find a nail, they found the factory. They excavated a small hut set apart from the main houses. Inside, they found a furnace, charcoal, and slag, the waste product of smelting iron. The Vikings were harvesting bog iron, a type of iron deposit found in the peat, and processing it to repair their ships. This was the first ironworks in the New World. The sound of the hammer striking the anvil rang out across this bay 5 centuries before the Santa Maria set sail. But who was here? Was it just a boatload of rough warriors looking for a fight? The answer lies in a tiny, unassuming object carved from soapstone, a spindle whorl. This is a small weight used on a drop spindle to spin wool into yarn. In Viking society, spinning and weaving were exclusively the domain of women. Finding this tool changed the entire narrative. It meant that men didn't just come here to raid, they brought their wives, their families. They came to stay. They came to colonize. We also found evidence that they didn't just stay on this cold tip of Newfoundland. In the sod walls, archaeologists found the shells of butternuts, white walnuts. Butternut trees do not grow in Newfoundland. The nearest place they grow is New Brunswick, hundreds of miles to the south. This means the Vikings were sailing deep into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, exploring the warmer, river-rich lands that would one day become the United States. So, why is it a sleeping city? Why isn't New York a Viking city today? The sleep of Lance Auxiliary Meadows is a soft sleep. Unlike Pompeii or Tiwanaku, there was no catastrophe here. The archaeological layers show no signs of a massacre, no burning of the longhouses by enemies. It appears that after a few years, perhaps a decade or two, the Vikings simply packed up and left. They likely realized that they were too far from home. The supply line to Greenland and Norway was too long and dangerous. And the locals, whom the Vikings called Skraelings, were numerous and fierce. The sagas tell of skirmishes and trade deals gone wrong. A tiny colony of 100 Vikings couldn't hold out against a continent of indigenous nations. So, they loaded their ships. They took their iron tools, their woven rugs, and their weapons. They closed the heavy wooden doors of the sod houses for the last time. They sailed away into the fog, and the door to the Americas, which had been briefly cracked open, gently closed again. The roofs eventually caved in. The grass grew over the hearths. The iron furnace went cold. The site slept for 1,000 years, visited only by the caribou and the seabirds. Standing there today, looking out at the cold ocean, there is a profound sense of what if. If they had stayed, if the colony had thrived, the entire history of the Western Hemisphere would have been different. We might be speaking a dialect of Norse today. Lance Auxiliary Meadows is a monument to a false start. It is a reminder that history isn't a straight line of progress. Sometimes, exploration reaches out, touches a new world, and then pulls back, leaving nothing but a few rusty nails and a grassy mound to whisper the story. We are nearly at the end of our physical journey across the globe. We have dug through mud, sand, and ash. But for our next section, we aren't going to use shovels. We aren't even going to touch the ground. We are going to see how the future of archaeology isn't about looking down at the dirt, but looking up from the sky. We are going to learn how we are waking up entire civilizations without moving a single stone. We have traveled the globe, standing in the dust of the desert and the mist of the mountains. We have looked at the stones with our own eyes and touched the walls with our own hands. But the era of the explorer with a machete hacking through the jungle, or the archaeologist with a trowel brushing away dirt, is slowly changing. We are entering a new age of discovery. We are no longer just looking at the earth, we are looking through it. The cities of the future and the past are being found not by sweat, but by light. For centuries, archaeology was a destructive science. To find out what was inside a mound, you had to dig it up. To map a ruin in the forest, you had to cut down the trees. Digging is, by definition, an act of erasing. Once you dig through a layer of soil, you destroy that context forever. You can never put the dirt back exactly how it was. But what if you could strip away the jungle without cutting a single leaf? What if you could see through the sand without moving a single grain? This is the promise of LiDAR. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. It is the magic wand of modern archaeology. Imagine a plane or a drone flying over the dense canopy of the Amazon rainforest or the jungles of Guatemala. Attached to the bottom of the plane is a sensor that shoots laser pulses down toward the ground. We aren't talking about a few beams, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of pulses per second. These pulses of light travel down, hit an object, and bounce back to the sensor. The machine measures exactly how long it takes for the light to return. Now, most of those laser beams hit the top of the trees and bounce back immediately. But, and this is the key, the jungle is full of tiny gaps. Between the leaves, between the branches, a small percentage of those laser beams slip through. They travel all the way down to the forest floor, hit the dirt, and bounce back. When the scientists get the data, they have a messy 3D cloud of billions of points. But using sophisticated algorithms, they can apply a digital filter. They can tell the computer, delete all the returns that came from the vegetation. In an instant, on the computer screen, the forest vanishes. The trees are deleted. And what is left is the naked earth. The results of this technology have been nothing short of earth-shattering. In 2018, a consortium of researchers scanned the Maya Biosphere Reserve in Guatemala. For decades, archaeologists had walked these jungles. They thought they knew the area well. They thought they were looking at a few scattered city-states with a population of maybe 1 million or 2. When the LiDAR images processed, the room went silent. The screen didn't show a few scattered towns. It showed a megalopolis. It revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures. It showed houses, palaces, and elevated highways connecting cities that were miles apart. It showed industrial-scale agriculture, terraces and irrigation channels that covered the entire landscape. The population estimates skyrocketed from a few million to perhaps 10 or 15 million people. LiDAR proved that the Maya civilization was as dense and complex as ancient China or Rome. It had been hiding in plain sight, sleeping under a green blanket that we couldn't see through until now. It's a humbling realization. We thought we were walking through a virgin wilderness, but we were actually walking through the suburbs of a ghost city. But LiDAR only works if you can see the sky. What about the things buried deep underground, under the pavement of modern cities or the sands of the desert? For that, we use ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. Think of GPR as an ultrasound for the Earth. You drag a machine that looks like a lawnmower across the ground. It shoots high-frequency radio waves down into the soil. When these waves hit something hard or different, like a stone wall, a metal shield, or a pocket of air, they bounce back differently. As you walk, a monitor builds a slice view of the underworld. It is a grainy, black and white image, but to a trained eye, it is a treasure map. A straight line is a wall. A square is a room. A circle is a hearth or a well. We are using this right now to map the Roman city of Falerie Novi in Italy. Without digging a single hole, scientists have mapped the entire city, the bath complex, the market, the temples, and even the water pipes. We can walk the streets of the city in a digital simulation, knowing exactly where every building is, while the actual site remains a flat, grassy field where sheep graze. The sheep have no idea they are eating grass on the roof of a temple. This non-invasive approach is crucial. It respects the sleep of the city. We don't have to wake it up by ripping it apart. We can dream with it. We can learn its secrets without disturbing its rest. And then, there is the view from space. Satellite archaeology is changing the game on a global scale. We are using satellites that see in the infrared spectrum. Why infrared? Because underground structures affect the vegetation above them. Imagine a stone wall buried 3 feet underground. The soil above that wall is shallower than the soil around it. It holds less moisture. So, the grass growing on top of that wall is slightly more stressed. It might look green to the naked eye, but in the infrared spectrum, it glows a different color. It looks hotter or drier. Conversely, if there is a deep ditch or a grave cut into the bedrock that has been filled with loose soil, that soil holds more moisture. The grass above it is healthier and cooler. Sarah Parcak, a pioneer in this field, calls herself a space archaeologist. By analyzing these subtle color shifts in satellite images, she has identified thousands of potential sites in Egypt alone, tombs, pyramids, and settlements that are completely invisible from the ground. She has found the outlines of the ancient city of Tanis. She has found Viking settlements in North America. It turns the entire planet into a dig site. We are realizing that the empty spaces on our maps are actually full. The most cutting-edge technology sounds like pure science fiction, muon tomography. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays from outer space hit the Earth's atmosphere. They are raining down on us all the time. They pass through our bodies, our houses, and the Earth. But they don't pass through everything equally. Dense rock, like limestone, absorbs more muons than empty air. Scientists recently placed muon detectors inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. They left them there for months, catching these cosmic particles as they rained through the pyramid. It's like taking an X-ray, but the radiation source is the universe itself. The result? They found a void. A massive, previously unknown chamber, over 30 meters long, located above the Grand Gallery. We don't know what's inside. It has no door. It has been sealed since the pyramid was built 4,500 years ago. But we know it's there because the ghosts of the cosmos told us. This is the new philosophy of awakening. We are moving from an era of extraction to an era of perception. We used to measure our success by the artifacts we brought back to museums, the gold masks, the statues, the jewels. Now, we measure success by the data we gather. The cities are still sleeping. The jungle still covers the Maya temples. The sand still covers the Egyptian tombs. But they are no longer lost. They are glowing on our screens, mapped down to the millimeter. We know they are there. This brings us to a profound question. If we can see the city, do we need to dig it up? Is it better to leave it there, safe in its earthen cocoon, for future generations who might have even better technology? Maybe the most respectful thing we can do for these sleeping giants is to let them lie, watching over them with our lasers and our satellites, content to know their shape without disturbing their dreams. But no matter how much technology we use, there is always a human element. A city isn't just walls and roads. It's the echo of lives lived. As we move to our final reflections, we have to look at the unfinished business these cities left behind. The interrupted conversations. The dreams that never came true. Because every sleeping city is a story that stopped in the middle of a sentence. We are nearing the end of our journey through the archives of the earth. We have walked the streets of silence, touched the stones of power, and peered through the jungle canopy with lasers. But before we close the book, we must pause to look at the most poignant aspect of these sleeping cities. We need to talk about the things that were left undone. There is a specific category of artifact that haunts archaeologists more than any other. It isn't the golden mask or the finished statue. It is the work in progress. In the quarries of Aswan, Egypt, there lies a massive obelisk, carved on 3 sides, still attached to the bedrock on the 4th. It cracked during the carving process. You can almost feel the frustration of the master mason who dropped his chisel in 1200 BC, walked away, and never came back. It remains there, a massive stone question mark. In Pompeii, we find walls that were half painted. The buckets of lime and pigment were sitting right there on the scaffolding. The brushstrokes stop in mid-sweep. It captures the exact nanosecond when the normal world ended and the catastrophe began. In the Viking settlement of Lance Auxiliary Meadows, we find raw bog iron that was gathered but never smelted. It represents a repair job on a ship that was never finished, or a weapon that was never forged. These interrupted sentences of history strike a chord in us because they are so relatable. We all have to-do lists. We all have projects we are meaning to finish. We assume, with a quiet arrogance, that we will have a tomorrow to finish them. The people of these lost cities made the same assumption. The merchant in Nair assumed he would finish weaving that rug. The baker in Pompeii assumed he would take the bread out of the oven. The engineer in Ankara assumed the canals would always flow. The sleep of these cities teaches us a profound lesson about the fragility of plans. It reminds us that civilization is not a static object, it is a precarious balancing act. The most powerful lesson, however, comes from the environment. When we analyze the fall of these great metropolises, Anka, Tiwanaku, the Maya cities, the settlements of the Indus Valley, we see a recurring pattern. It is rarely an external enemy that destroys them. It is almost always a broken relationship with nature. The Khmer Empire of Angkor was a miracle of water engineering. They bent the rivers to their will. But as the city grew, the system became too complex, too rigid. When the climate shifted, when the climate whip of droughts and floods arrived, the very infrastructure that made them great became their tomb. They had engineered themselves into a corner. They couldn't adapt fast enough. The same is true for the Maya. They cut down the jungle to plant corn to feed their growing millions. But without the trees, the soil eroded, and the local rainfall patterns changed, making the droughts worse. They inadvertently turned their garden into a desert. In Tiwanaku, the raised fields were a brilliant adaptation to the cold. But they relied on a stable climate. When the 80-year drought hit, the technology couldn't save them. These are not just stories about ancient people, they are data points for us. They tell us that sustainability isn't a modern buzzword, it is the oldest rule of survival. A city that consumes its environment faster than the environment can regenerate is a city with an expiration date. But there is also a lesson of hope here. Look at Jen, the city of mud. It survives not by being strong, but by being soft. It survives because the community comes together every year to heal it. It accepts the cycle of decay and renewal. It doesn't try to conquer nature, it dances with it. Look at the Vikings. They realized the environment of North America was too harsh for their current supply lines, so they made the rational, difficult decision to leave. They survived by retreating. Sometimes, the smartest move is to walk away. And look at the sheer tenacity of the human spirit. In every single one of these ruins, we find art. Even in the face of decline, even when the water was running low and the trade routes were drying up, people were still carving beautiful statues, painting frescoes, and writing poems. In the caves of the Levant, Neolithic people buried their dead with flowers. In the desperate final days of Pompeii, someone took the time to grab a small statuette of a god before running. We find flutes made of bone. We find dice. We find toys. This tells us that a city is more than just a survival machine. It is a vessel for meaning. Even when the walls fall down, the art remains. The expression of the human soul is the most durable material we have. We also learn that collapse is often a slow, quiet process. We tend to fear the apocalypse, the sudden end. But for the people of the Indus Valley or the Silk Road, the end was a slow fade. It was a gradual realization that life would be better somewhere else. It was a migration. The descendants of the Maya didn't vanish, they are still there in Guatemala and Mexico, speaking their languages, weaving their textiles. The descendants of the Incas are still farming the terraces of the Andes. The cities fell asleep, but the people woke up somewhere else. Civilization is a fluid thing. It flows like water. If you block it here, it rises there. Standing in these ruins, you don't feel a sense of despair. You feel a sense of perspective. You realize that our modern cities, New York, Tokyo, London, are just the current chapter in a very long book. We are building on top of the layers of the past. We are the current caretakers of the flame. And one day, thousands of years from now, perhaps a future archaeologist will fly a drone over our cities, or use a sensor to look through the dust, and they will wonder about us. They will look at our unfinished obelisks, our skyscrapers, our hard drives, our highways. They will try to piece together who we were. They will see that we, too, were obsessed with connection, with water, with comfort, and with leaving a mark. They will see that we were exactly like the people of Pompeii or Petra, just with different tools. The unfinished dreams of the past are not failures. They are invitations. They invite us to pick up the chisel. They invite us to continue the weaving. They invite us to learn from the silence, to respect the soil, and to build a world that might just manage to stay awake a little longer. And so, we arrive at the end of our expedition. We have traveled across continents and across millennia. We have stood in the shadow of the volcano, walked the ocean floor, and climbed the steps of pyramids that touch the clouds. We have listened to the silence of the desert and the whisper of the jungle. We started this journey by talking about lost cities. But perhaps, after all we have seen, we can agree that lost is the wrong word. Nothing is truly lost on a planet this good at keeping secrets. These cities are the sleeping giants of our collective memory. They are the hard drives of the human experience, backed up in stone and earth. They have been waiting for us. Waiting for our curiosity to grow sharp enough, for our technology to grow bright enough, to find them again. The feeling of awakening a city is a profound human emotion. Think of the diver brushing the sand off the face of a statue in Heraclean. Think of the archaeologist shining a flashlight into the tunnel of Teotihuacan for the first time in 1,800 years. Think of the scientist watching the LiDAR screen light up with the hidden grid of a Maya metropolis. It is a moment of connection. It is a handshake across time. When we find these places, we aren't just finding ruins. We are finding ourselves. We are finding the mirror image of our own ambitions, our own fears, and our own daily lives. We see that the mother in Mohenjo-Daro who worried about her children's health is no different from a mother today. We see that the politician in Pompeii seeking votes is no different from a politician today. We see that the artist in Petra trying to create something beautiful is the same as an artist today. The technology changes. The clothes change. The languages change. But the human heart, the thing that builds the city, the thing that fills the rooms with laughter and tears, that remains exactly the same. This is the comfort of history. It tells us that we are not alone. We are part of a vast, continuous chain of dreamers and builders. We are walking on a path that has been paved by billions of feet before us. And the most exciting thought is this: we are not done finding them. Experts estimate that we have found perhaps only a fraction, maybe 10% or less, of the archaeological sites that exist on Earth. The Amazon is still largely unexplored. The deserts of Arabia and Africa are vast. The ocean floors are mostly unmapped. The layers of silt in the great river deltas run deep. Right now, as you listen to this, there are cities sleeping beneath your feet. There are temples hiding under the ice of Antarctica, perhaps from a time before the ice came. There are settlements waiting in the thickest parts of the Congo. There are shipwrecks laden with the treasures of lost empires sitting in the darkness of the Pacific Trench. They are there, sleeping, waiting. Science is the key that unlocks these doors. Every year, our tools get better. We are learning to read the DNA in the dirt. We are learning to see the heat signatures of buried walls from space. We are learning to translate the uncrackable codes. We are entering a golden age of discovery. The past is not receding behind us, it is rising up to meet us. It is becoming clearer, sharper, and more vibrant with every passing year. So, tonight, as you lay your head down, let your imagination drift over the map of the world. Picture the globe spinning slowly in the dark. Picture the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe standing guard in Turkey, the oldest temple in the world, watching the stars turn. Picture the silent, underwater streets of Pavlopetri, where the fish swim through the windows of Bronze Age houses. Picture the jungle vines embracing the smiling faces of the Baen in Cambodia, holding them in a green, protective hug. Picture the red dust of Mars-like Hegra, settling softly on the unfinished tombs. The world is quiet now. The hustle of the ancient markets is gone. The smoke of the hearth fires has long since dissipated. The kings and the queens, the merchants and the masons, the children and the soldiers, they are all at rest. Their work is done. Their stories have been told, or are waiting to be told. And now, it is time for your own rest. The same earth that cradles those cities cradles you. The same stars that watched over Teotihuacan are watching over you. You are part of this long, beautiful story. Let the scale of it comfort you. Let the resilience of it soothe you. The world has been here for a long time, and it will be here for a long time to come. The cities sleep, and they are safe. You are safe. Let the noise of your own day fade away, just as the noise of those ancient streets faded. Let the dust settle. Let the lights go out. Drift along the river of time. Float past the pyramids, past the temples, past the quiet, empty courtyards. There is nothing to do now. Nothing to build. Nothing to solve. Just the quiet. Just the dark. Just the sleep. The fire has burned down to embers. The last scroll is rolled up and placed on the shelf. The lantern flickers, casting long, soft shadows against the walls of our imagination. We have traveled far tonight. We have walked 1,000 miles and spanned 1,000 years. But now, the journey brings us back to the most important place of all, right here. Right now. Feel the stillness of the room around you. It is a protective shell, just like the stone walls of Petra, just like the thick mud of Jen. It is your sanctuary. Listen to the rhythm of your own breathing. It is slow and steady, like the tides that wash over the sunken cities, like the wind that blows through the grass of the steppes. In and out. The past is a heavy book, and we can close it now. We can leave the ancients to their slumber. They are resting peacefully in the museum of the earth, covered by the blanket of time. They do not need us to remember them tonight. They have waited centuries, they can wait until morning. Let the images in your mind soften. The sharp edges of the pyramids blur into the night sky. The colors of the frescoes fade into a gentle gray. The sound of the chisels and the chariots drifts away into silence. Everything is slowing down. The earth is turning slowly, rocking us all in its gravity. You are weightless. You are drifting. There is a peace in knowing that things endure. That even when silence falls, beauty remains. Let the darkness wrap around you like cool silk. Let the quiet fill you up. The exploration is over. The discovery is done. Now, there is only the deep, vast, and gentle ocean of sleep.